Jasmine Wright stood frozen in the first-class cabin as champagne dripped down her pristine uniform, the passengers' laughter echoing in her ears. "Maybe in coach where you belong," sneered the businessman. Little did they know, tomorrow she wouldn't be serving them, she'd be firing them. Before we dive into this shocking story of disrespect and sweet revenge, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about karma catching up to racist bullies. Now let's see how these first-class passengers learned the hard way that appearances can be deceiving. Jasmine Wright carefully adjusted her Sapphire Airways uniform in the cramped bathroom of her luxury penthouse apartment. The crisp navy blazer with silver trim and matching pencil skirt weren't her usual attire, but for the past 6 months, this had been her work wardrobe. At 32 years old, with an MBA from Harvard and executive experience at 3 Fortune 500 companies, Jasmine was drastically overqualified for her current position as a flight attendant. But that was precisely the point. "Final day," she whispered to her reflection, pinning her natural curls into a neat bun that complied with company regulations. "Just get through today." The gleaming silver wings pinned to her lapel caught the light as she turned. They'd been a gift from her father, William Wright, founder and majority owner of Sapphire Airways. The man who had built a regional charter service into one of the most prestigious luxury airlines in the world never flew without his lucky wings, and the day Jasmine agreed to join the family business, he'd presented her with a matching pair. "To remind you that no matter how high you fly, it's how you treat people on the journey that matters," he'd said. William had always insisted that truly understanding a business meant knowing it from the ground up. That philosophy had guided Jasmine's unconventional preparation for taking over as Chief Operating Officer of Sapphire Airways. For 6 months, she'd worked anonymously as a flight attendant, experiencing firsthand the challenges faced by the airline's frontline employees. Not even her supervisor knew her true identity. Only Marcus Reynolds, the company's CEO and her father's most trusted advisor, was aware of the arrangement. Jasmine checked her watch, a simple Timex rather than the Rolex she usually wore, and grabbed her employee ID badge. The photo showed her with straightened hair and minimal makeup, a deliberate choice to distance her appearance from the society page photos of William Wright's accomplished daughter. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Everything's set for tomorrow's announcement. Good luck on your final flight." Tomorrow at the company's 25th anniversary celebration, Jasmine would be officially introduced as the new COO, taking over operational control as her father stepped into a reduced role due to his health concerns. The board members, executives, and major investors would all be there, including several who would be passengers on today's flight from New York to Los Angeles. As her driver navigated through early morning Manhattan traffic, Jasmine's mind drifted to the childhood that had prepared her for this moment. William Wright had never been an easy father, demanding excellence while showing unwavering love. Despite their wealth, he'd insisted she take summer jobs as a teenager, work her way through college, and prove herself outside the family business before joining it. "The right name might open doors," he'd always said, "but it's what you do once you're inside that matters." Her thoughts were interrupted by another text, this one from her brother Tyler. "Heard about the big announcement tomorrow. We need to talk." Jasmine sighed, pocketing the phone without responding. Her relationship with her older brother had grown increasingly strained over the past year. At 38, Tyler had expected to inherit leadership of Sapphire Airways, despite his minimal involvement in the company's operations and his troubling management style during the brief periods he'd worked there. When their father had made it clear that Jasmine would be taking the reins, Tyler had all but disappeared from family functions, surfacing only for board meetings where he held a seat due to his share ownership. The car pulled up to the employee entrance at JFK International Airport. Jasmine thanked her driver, then squared her shoulders before entering the building, switching fully into her flight attendant persona. "Morning, Jasmine," called Gabriela Rodriguez, a fellow flight attendant who had become a friend over the past months. At 29, the Dominican-American woman had been with Sapphire Airways for 5 years and had shown Jasmine the ropes when she first started. "Ready for the VIP Express?" Gabriela asked, falling into step beside her as they made their way through security. "Heard we've got half the board and some major investors on this flight." Just another day serving the elite, Jasmine replied with a practiced smile. At least we get to work first class together, Gabriella said. Better tips if nothing else. Jasmine nodded, though tipping wasn't allowed by company policy, a rule regularly ignored by both passengers and staff. The extra money meant little to Jasmine, but she'd seen how important it was to many of her co-workers who struggled with the airline industry's notoriously low wages. They reached the crew briefing room where the head flight attendant, Diane Cooper, was already reviewing the passenger manifest for flight SA 1125. "Listen up, people," Diane announced to the assembled crew. "This is not a regular flight. We have multiple board members and major shareholders traveling with us today. Everything must be perfect." Diane's gaze lingered on Jasmine and Gabriella longer than the others. "Remember, these passengers expect a certain level of service. They're used to the best." The implication wasn't lost on Jasmine. Over the months, she'd noticed how Diane often assigned the white flight attendants to the most prestigious routes and positions, while crew members of color were frequently relegated to less visible roles or more demanding sections of the aircraft. As the briefing concluded, Diane predictably assigned Jasmine and Gabriella to different sections of first class. Jasmine to the forward section where the VIPs would be seated, and Gabriella to the rear section. "Divide and conquer," Gabriella muttered under her breath as they left the briefing. "God forbid two women of color work the same section together." Jasmine squeezed her friend's arm sympathetically. "I'll save you if Richard Thornton starts demanding special whiskey again. And I'll rescue you if his son tries hitting on you for the 10th time," Gabriella replied with an eye roll. Richard Thornton was infamous among the crew, a hedge fund manager and major investor in Sapphire Airways, with a reputation for treating staff like personal servants. His son Brad was equally notorious for his inappropriate advances toward female crew members. Both were listed on today's manifest. As they boarded the Airbus A350 to begin preparation for the 5-hour flight, Jasmine felt a flutter of anticipation. After today, everything would change. She would no longer be just another employee to be dismissed or disrespected. She would be in a position to implement real changes, to address the casual discrimination she'd witnessed, to improve working conditions, and to reshape the company culture her father had originally envisioned, but that had slowly eroded under the influence of investors like Thornton. While arranging welcome champagne flutes in the galley, Jasmine spotted Marcus Reynolds boarding early to personally check the aircraft. Their eyes met briefly, his with a subtle nod of encouragement. Tomorrow she would stand beside him at the podium rather than serving him drinks. Just one more flight, she reminded herself, straightening the perfectly folded linen napkins. One more day of staying invisible. But as the crew finished their preparations and passengers began to board, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that staying invisible might prove more difficult than she'd anticipated. "Is this the best you could do, Marcus? I specifically requested 3A for the view." Richard Thornton's voice carried through the first-class cabin before he was fully visible, his displeasure preceding him like a cold front. Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Sapphire Airways, maintained his professional smile as he escorted the airline's largest individual investor onto the aircraft. At 55, Marcus had navigated the corporate world long enough to perfect the art of appeasing difficult personalities, without ceding ground. "I assure you, Richard, 4A offers an identical view. We had to accommodate several board members with specific seating requests," Marcus explained smoothly. Richard Thornton scoffed, his expensive Italian loafers squeaking slightly against the cabin floor as he moved toward his seat. At 58, Thornton carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. His tailored Tom Ford suit and Patek Philippe watch were calculated signals of his wealth, worn like armor in business settings. "Dad, does it really matter? All the seats up here are practically identical," said a young woman trailing behind him. Melissa Thornton, 28, was scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up at the cabin crew as she passed. "It's about principle, Melissa," Richard replied sharply. "When you pay for the best, you expect the best." Following them was Brad Thornton, Richard's 30-year-old son, who, unlike his sister, was very aware of the cabin crew, particularly the female members. His gaze lingered inappropriately on the white flight attendant greeting passengers at the entrance before dismissively passing over Jasmine. "I think I'm going to enjoy this flight," Brad said, adjusting his designer sunglasses as he appraised the staff like items on a menu. Jasmine maintained her professional smile, having encountered the Thornton family on previous flights. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thornton," she greeted Richard. "May I show you to your seat?" Richard barely acknowledged her, instead continuing his conversation with Marcus as if she were invisible. "The quarterly numbers were disappointing, Marcus. The board will have questions tomorrow." As Jasmine stood patiently waiting to assist, Brad Thornton stepped between her and his father, addressing Marcus directly. "Is Jessica working this flight? The blonde who usually handles first class? She knows how I like my drinks." Marcus tensed, almost imperceptibly. "Our crew assignments rotate regularly, Mr. Thornton. I'm sure all our staff will provide excellent service." Jasmine stepped forward again. "I'll be serving your section today. If you have any specific preferences, I'm happy to accommodate them." Brad finally looked at her, his expression making it clear he found her an inadequate substitute. "Just make sure the champagne is properly chilled this time." The dismissal stung, though Jasmine had experienced far worse during her undercover assignment. She guided the Thorntons to their seats, offering to take their jackets and arrange their carry-on items in the overhead compartments. "I can manage my own luggage," Richard said curtly, struggling to lift his heavy briefcase into the bin. Jasmine stepped back, observing how differently the same man interacted with Emma, the white flight attendant working the neighboring aisle. With Emma, Richard was all smiles and "Thank you, dear," as she helped with his daughter's bags. As the first-class cabin filled, the stark contrast in treatment became even more apparent. Victoria Carmichael and Charles Daniels, both board members, in their 60s, boarded together chatting amiably. They greeted Emma warmly, complimenting her hair, while merely nodding at Jasmine when she offered them champagne. "Victoria, Charles, good to see you," Richard called from his seat. "Come join us for a moment before takeoff." The small group converged near the Thornton seats, creating an impromptu meeting that Jasmine could partly overhear as she continued her preparations. "The anniversary celebration should be interesting," Victoria said, lowering her voice slightly. "Have you heard anything about this big announcement William is planning?" "Something about restructuring leadership," Charles replied. "Though if you ask me, it's long overdue. The old man's been slipping." "As long as the restructuring includes modernizing operations," Richard interjected. "Sapphire has gotten complacent, too focused on Wright's outdated philosophies rather than maximizing returns." Victoria nodded. "The brand needs protection. We're seeing too many changes in the clientele lately." "Exactly." Alexander Reeves, another board member who had just arrived, joined the conversation. At 60, Reeves had the florid complexion of a man who enjoyed his privileges, including frequent first-class travel. "The exclusive image is what justifies our premium pricing. Start letting in too many of the wrong elements and what's the point?" Jasmine approached with a tray of champagne flutes. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Reeves. Would you care for some champagne before takeoff?" Alexander accepted a glass without looking at her. "The new uniforms are an improvement, I suppose," he remarked to the group as if Jasmine weren't standing right there. "Though I still think the previous design had more class." "It's not just the uniforms that need attention," Victoria said, her voice dropping further, though not enough to prevent Jasmine from hearing. "Have you noticed the hiring trends in the past year? I'm all for diversity, but not at the expense of our image." "The wrong kind of diversity," Richard agreed with a knowing look. "Not everyone understands the level of sophistication our clients expect." As the conversation continued with thinly veiled racist commentary, Jasmine maintained her professional demeanor, though her jaw tightened slightly. These were the people with significant influence over her family's company, people who would soon discover she was about to become their colleague, not their servant. A new passenger approached the first-class cabin, immediately standing out from the others. Michael Chen, 34, dressed in a casual but clearly expensive outfit of designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, had none of the entitled air that characterized the other first-class passengers. As the founder of a successful tech company, his wealth was newer, but no less substantial. "Good morning," he greeted Jasmine with direct eye contact and a genuine smile. "12B, please." "Right this way, Mr. Chen," Jasmine responded, grateful for the basic courtesy. As she guided him to his seat, Michael observed the group of board members. "Quite the power meeting happening already," he commented quietly. "Several board members and investors traveling for tomorrow's company anniversary event," Jasmine explained. "Ah, the Sapphire Airways celebration. I received an invitation as a potential new partner." He glanced at the group again, then back to Jasmine. "Are they always so—" "Yes," Jasmine answered simply, understanding his unfinished question. Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting." After settling Michael in his seat, Jasmine returned to her duties, passing by Brad Thornton, who was now openly flirting with Emma, while she prepared the cabin for departure. "You should join us at the hotel tonight," Brad was saying. "We're having a little pre-celebration gathering, very exclusive." Emma laughed politely. "That's very kind, but we have regulations about fraternizing with passengers." "Rules are meant to be broken," Brad replied with a wink. "I could put in a good word with management." When Jasmine approached to collect his empty champagne glass, Brad's demeanor changed completely. "This isn't cold enough," he complained, handing her the glass with barely concealed disdain. "And make sure you bring the Krug next time, not whatever this is." "Of course, Mr. Thornton. I'll bring you a properly chilled glass of Krug immediately," Jasmine replied, maintaining her professionalism despite the treatment. As the boarding process concluded and the doors prepared to close, Jasmine overheard Richard Thornton continuing his commentary on the airline's direction. "Tomorrow's meeting will set the tone for Sapphire's future," he was telling Victoria and Alexander. "William won't be able to hold on to his outdated practices much longer." "His health isn't good," Victoria added with false concern. "Perhaps it's time for fresh leadership with a more contemporary vision." "I have some specific recommendations prepared," Richard said, "starting with operational efficiencies in staffing." "You mean fewer people like her?" Alexander tilted his head subtly toward Jasmine, not bothering to lower his voice. "I'm on board with that. Some of these diversity hires clearly don't understand our clientele." Jasmine turned away, busying herself with final preparations as the aircraft doors closed. In 24 hours, these people would discover exactly who she was. The revelation would be satisfying, certainly, but Jasmine was more focused on the challenges ahead. The casual racism and classism displayed by these powerful figures in her family's company confirmed what her undercover work had revealed. Sapphire Airways had strayed far from her father's founding vision of respect and excellence. As the plane pushed back from the gate, Jasmine caught Gabriella's eye across the cabin. Her friend gave her a subtle look that asked if everything was okay. Jasmine nodded slightly. She could handle one more day of this. After all, tomorrow, everything would change. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, carrying its passengers toward Los Angeles, and unknowingly, transporting most of them toward one of the most humbling experiences of their privileged lives. The Airbus A350 reached its cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, settling into the 5-hour journey from New York to Los Angeles. Inside the first-class cabin, Jasmine Wright moved with practiced efficiency, preparing the initial drink service for her demanding passengers. "Still water with lemon for you, Ms. Carmichael," Jasmine confirmed, approaching Victoria with a perfectly arranged glass. Victoria barely glanced up from her tablet. "I specifically asked for sparkling." "Pay attention next time." Jasmine apologized and returned moments later with sparkling water, despite being certain Victoria had requested still water initially. The small power play wasn't unusual. She'd experienced passengers changing their orders just to assert dominance over cabin crew. 2 rows ahead, Richard Thornton was already on his second scotch, his voice growing louder as he continued discussing business with Charles Daniels and Alexander Reeves. His son Brad had moved from his assigned seat to sit beside Emma during her brief break, his hand occasionally brushing against hers in ways that made the flight attendant visibly uncomfortable. "You really should consider my offer," Brad was saying to Emma. "The Thornton family has significant influence at Sapphire. We could help your career tremendously. Jasmine watched the interaction while preparing a drink for Michael Chen, who also noticed Emma's discomfort. Is that something that happens often? Michael asked quietly, as Jasmine served his ginger ale. More often than it should, Jasmine replied discreetly. Some passengers believe their status entitles them to special considerations. And I'm guessing those who refuse face consequences? Jasmine's slight pause was answer enough. That's not right, Michael said, his expression darkening. Many things aren't right, Mr. Chen, but they're reality. The flight progressed and Jasmine continued her duties with professional poise despite the mounting disrespect. When she approached Richard Thornton with a fresh drink, he raised his hand dismissively. I'd prefer to be served by someone else, he stated loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. The blonde, perhaps. She seems more experienced. Jasmine maintained her composure. Emma is currently serving another section, sir. I'm happy to assist you. Fine, Richard sighed dramatically, as if making a great concession. He took the drink without acknowledgement and immediately resumed his conversation with Alexander Reeves. As I was saying, the presentation tomorrow will outline our vision for Sapphire's future. More efficiency, less unnecessary overhead. William Wright built something impressive, but his sentimental approach to business is outdated. Completely agree, Alexander replied, swirling his whiskey. The diversity initiatives alone are costing a fortune with no clear ROI. Exactly. We're running a luxury airline, not a social justice program. Their voices carried, intentionally, just loud enough for Jasmine to hear as she worked nearby. She felt her phone vibrate in her pocket, likely another message from Marcus or her father about tomorrow's announcement, but she couldn't check it now. Jasmine moved to the galley where Gabriella was preparing the meal service trays. You okay? Gabriella asked, noting Jasmine's tense expression. The dinosaurs giving you trouble? Nothing I haven't handled before, Jasmine assured her, though the constant barrage of microaggressions was wearing, though the Thornton men are in rare form today. Brad cornered me in the rear galley earlier, Gabriella confided. Wanted to know if I'd be working the return flight tomorrow. When I said no, he lost interest pretty quickly. They're discussing plans to restructure the airline, Jasmine said quietly. Seems to include cutting unnecessary diversity initiatives. Gabriella's expression hardened. Of course they are. Heaven forbid their champagne costs an extra $1 so employees can make a living wage or customers who don't look like them feel welcome. The call button from Richard Thornton's seat illuminated, interrupting their conversation. Jasmine sighed and returned to the cabin. Yes, Mr. Thornton, how can I help you? Richard held up his empty glass. This ice has melted. I need fresh ice. It was a trivial request that could have waited for the regular service round, but Jasmine nodded. Right, away, sir. As she turned to head back to the galley, Richard shifted suddenly in his seat, extending his leg into the aisle. Jasmine, carrying the empty glass, had to quickly sidestep to avoid tripping. The abrupt movement caused her to bump into another passenger who was returning from the lavatory, sending both of them off balance. Richard immediately raised his voice. Watch where you're going. You nearly spilled my drink. The drink that was already empty. The drink she was holding. The absurdity of the accusation might have been amusing if it weren't so deliberately malicious. I apologize, sir, Jasmine said, steadying herself. I'll be more careful. This is exactly the problem with lowering hiring standards, Richard said loudly to Alexander. Basic competence gets sacrificed for quotas. Jasmine returned to the galley, took a deep breath, and prepared a fresh drink with new ice. When she delivered it to Richard, he accepted it without acknowledging her. As she turned to leave, Richard shifted again, this time bumping her arm deliberately. The expensive scotch splashed over the rim of the glass, speckling her uniform. Now look what you've done, Richard exclaimed, as if she had been the one to cause the spill. This is unacceptable. Absolutely unprofessional. Heads turned throughout the first-class cabin. Victoria Carmichael smirked slightly. Brad Thornton snickered openly. Maybe you should stick to serving in coach where you belong, Richard added, his voice dripping with condescension. This level of service isn't appropriate for first class. The cabin fell silent as passengers watched the scene unfold. Jasmine stood perfectly still, champagne dripping down her uniform, aware that all eyes were on her. She could see Gabriella moving toward her from the galley, concern etched on her face. "I'll get you a fresh drink and something to clean that." "Up, sir," Jasmine said evenly, years of training keeping her voice steady despite the humiliation burning through her. "Don't bother," Richard waved dismissively. "I'll speak with your supervisor about this incident. What's your employee number?" Before Jasmine could respond, Michael Chen spoke up from his seat. "I believe I saw what happened, sir. The spill wasn't her fault." Richard turned, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "And you are?" "Michael Chen, and I distinctly saw you move your arm as she was setting down your drink." Richard's expression darkened. "I don't believe anyone asked for your interpretation of events. Just providing my observation," Michael replied calmly, "as I'm sure the onboard cameras did as well." Richard faltered momentarily, then regained his imperious tone. "Well, regardless, the service on this flight has been substandard. I'll be addressing it with management." Jasmine excused herself to clean her uniform, retreating to the crew area, where Gabriella immediately handed her a towel. "That pompous racist," Gabriella muttered, helping Jasmine dab at the stains. "He did that on purpose. Everyone saw it." "It doesn't matter," Jasmine said quietly. "Let it go." "It does matter. You should report him." "And who would that report go to? The people who are having drinks with him? The supervisors who depend on keeping investors happy to maintain their jobs?" Jasmine shook her head. "The system is designed to protect people like Richard Thornton, not us." Gabriella studied her friend's face, noticing something different in her expression. "You seem almost calm about this. I would be furious." "Oh, I am," Jasmine admitted. "But some battles are fought differently." Her phone vibrated again, and this time she checked it quickly. A message from her father. "Everything set for tomorrow. Proud of you." Jasmine slipped the phone back into her pocket just as Diane Cooper, the head flight attendant, approached with a stern expression. "Mr. Thornton has filed a complaint about unprofessional service," Diane informed her. "He's a very important passenger, Jasmine. I'm going to need to document this." "Of course he did," Gabriella interjected, "after he deliberately caused her to spill his drink." "That's not what Mr. Thornton reported," Diane replied coolly. "And multiple first-class passengers have supported his account." "Multiple first-class passengers who are all traveling together and all have the same agenda," Gabriella countered. Diane's expression hardened. "That's enough, Gabriella. Return to your section immediately." After Gabriella reluctantly left, Diane turned back to Jasmine. "I'm reassigning you to the rear first-class section for the remainder of the flight. Emma will take over your current passengers." "That's exactly what they want," Jasmine said quietly. "What I want is to avoid further incidents with our most valued customers," Diane replied. "Change your uniform jacket and report to Section B in 5 minutes." As Diane walked away, Jasmine went to her crew bag to retrieve her spare uniform jacket. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear or humiliation, but from controlled anger. She had experienced and documented 6 months of such incidents, building evidence of the systemic problems within the company she was about to help lead. While changing, she sent a brief text to Marcus. "Thornton incident documented. We'll discuss later." His reply came immediately. "Understood. Stay the course." Jasmine squared her shoulders and prepared to return to the cabin with her head held high. One more day. Just one more day. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Comment number 1 if you would have confronted Richard Thornton directly, or number 2 if you would stay professional and bide your time for the right moment. Like and subscribe to see how Jasmine handles this situation and what happens when these first-class bullies learn who she really is. But here's the real question. How far will Richard and his entitled friends go before they cross the line completely? And what will be their breaking point when they learn the truth? 3 hours into the transcontinental flight, the first-class cabin had settled into a deceptive calm. Lunch service had concluded without major incident, though the reassignment of Jasmine to the rear section had clearly pleased Richard Thornton and his associates. They now occupied a cluster of seats in the forward cabin, continuing their informal business meeting over expensive wines and increasingly loud conversation. Jasmine maintained her professionalism while serving her new section, which included Michael Chen. He had observed the earlier confrontation and now watched with interest as she worked with undiminished poise. "That was handled with remarkable restraint," Michael commented when she served his coffee. "Most people would have lost their composure." "Professional training," Jasmine replied with a small smile. "And perspective." "Perspective? Some battles aren't worth fighting. Others are just fought on different battlefields." Michael regarded her thoughtfully. "Wise words. You seem different from most flight attendants I've encountered." Jasmine maintained her practiced smile. "We all have our stories, Mr. Chen." "Indeed we do," he agreed. "And I suspect yours is more interesting than most." Before Jasmine could respond, a burst of raucous laughter from the forward cabin drew their attention. Richard Thornton was holding court, his voice carrying clearly throughout the first-class section as the alcohol continued to flow freely. "The old man doesn't understand modern business," Richard proclaimed, referring to William Wright without using his name. "Sentiment doesn't generate shareholder value. He built an impressive company," Charles Daniels countered, though his tone suggested limited defense of the founder. "Credit where it's due. A company that's resting on its laurels," Richard retorted. "When was the last significant innovation? The last meaningful efficiency improvement? We're carrying dead weight in every department." Victoria Carmichael nodded in agreement. "The focus on employee programs and diversity initiatives is admirable in theory, but the resources could be better allocated to shareholder returns." "Exactly," Richard exclaimed, too loudly for the confined space. "We're not running a charity. Premium prices demand premium service, and that means having the right people in the right positions." He glanced meaningfully toward Jasmine as he said this. Jasmine pretended not to hear as she continued her duties, though she was documenting every word mentally. These were the power players in her family's company, openly discussing dismantling her father's vision. Brad Thornton, now visibly intoxicated, added his perspective. "The old man should have brought in professional management years ago. Family businesses always get soft." "Well, after tomorrow's meeting, things will change," Richard stated confidently. "The board has heard my concerns. The restructuring announcement will be just the beginning." Alexander Reeves raised his glass. "To the future of Sapphire Airways, sleeker, more efficient, and properly positioned in the luxury market." "Without the unnecessary baggage," Victoria added with a thin smile. As the group continued their self-congratulatory toasts, Gabriella approached Jasmine in the galley, her expression tense. "They're talking about gutting the company," Gabriella whispered. "I've heard Richard mention staff reductions 3 times already, and the way he keeps looking at the diverse crew members when he talks about efficiency." "I know," Jasmine replied quietly. "How can you be so calm? This affects all of us. My mother depends on my health insurance. 2 of our colleagues are single parents." Jasmine placed a reassuring hand on her friend's arm. "Trust me, Gabriella. Sometimes things aren't what they seem." Gabriella studied her face. "You know something." Before Jasmine could respond, the call button from Brad Thornton's seat lit up. With a sigh, Gabriella went to attend to him. Moments later, Jasmine heard Brad's intoxicated voice rising in volume. "Come on, sweetheart, it's just a friendly invitation. The hotel has an amazing bar." "I'm sorry, sir, but as I explained, company policy prohibits socializing with passengers," Gabriella replied professionally. "Policy, policy, policy," Brad slurred slightly. "Don't you ever just have fun? Or is that not allowed either?" "I can offer you another beverage, Mr. Thornton, or perhaps some water," Gabriella suggested, attempting to redirect the conversation. "What I want is for you to stop being so uptight," Brad insisted, his hand reaching out to touch Gabriella's. "My father practically owns this airline. No one would say anything." Gabriella stepped back. "Please don't touch me, sir." Richard, observing the interaction, laughed dismissively. "My son is paying you a compliment. Most girls would appreciate the attention." "Dad's right," Brad continued, emboldened. "We're first-class passengers. First-class service should include first-class attitude. Victoria Carmichael chuckled. Don't waste your time, Brad. These diversity hires never understand the concept of service. The comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jasmine, watching from the galley, saw Gabriella's posture stiffen. She moved forward immediately, stepping between her friend and the increasingly hostile group. Mr. Thornton, Jasmine addressed Brad directly. I believe Ms. Rodriguez has offered you a beverage. Would you prefer water or something else? Brad turned his attention to Jasmine, his expression darkening. Look who's back, the clumsy one. Shouldn't you be mopping something? Richard laughed at his son's comment. Perhaps she'll spill this. Drink too. Though I suppose making messes is what these quota hires do best. Alexander joined in. Can't expect everyone to understand the standards of a premium experience. Some people are just more coach material. The thinly veiled racism was now completely overt. Jasmine maintained her composure, though she felt Gabriella trembling with anger beside her. I'm happy to serve you whatever beverage you'd prefer, sir, Jasmine repeated to Brad. Or if you'd rather be served by someone else, I can arrange that. What I'd prefer, Brad said, leaning forward aggressively, is staff who know their place and show proper appreciation for first-class passengers. Victoria nodded. Exactly. There's a reason we pay premium prices. We expect premium people serving us. Premium people, Gabriella echoed, unable to contain herself any longer. And what exactly makes someone premium in your estimation, Ms. Carmichael? Gabriella, Jasmine warned quietly. No, I'm curious, Gabriella continued, her professional veneer cracking. Is it the color of their skin, their accent, or just their willingness to tolerate disrespect? The cabin fell silent. Even passengers not involved in the conversation turned to watch the confrontation. Richard Thornton's face darkened with anger. This is precisely what I've been talking about. Unprofessional, confrontational, playing the race card when called out for substandard service. No one mentioned race until you did, Mr. Thornton, Michael Chen interjected, rising from, his seat. I've been observing this entire interaction, and the only substandard behavior I've witnessed has been from your group. Stay out of this, Richard snapped. This doesn't concern you. Actually, it concerns everyone who values basic human dignity, Michael replied evenly. Victoria Carmichael turned to her colleagues with an exaggerated sigh. And this is exactly why the airline's reputation is suffering. They've allowed the wrong sort of passengers as well as staff. Jasmine stepped forward, placing herself between Gabriella and the Thornton group. Mr. Thornton, perhaps we should take a moment to de-escalate. I'm happy to speak with the captain about your concerns when we land. The captain? Richard scoffed. I'll be speaking directly with William Wright tomorrow. I'm personal friends with the owner, in case you weren't aware. One call from me and you'll be looking for a new job by the end of the week. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Jasmine, but she maintained her professional demeanor. I understand, sir. In the meantime, how can we make the remainder of your flight more comfortable? You can start by getting us a flight attendant who understands service, Brad interjected, his words slurring slightly from alcohol. Preferably one who doesn't have an attitude problem. Gabriella opened her mouth to respond, but Jasmine subtly touched her arm, silently urging restraint. Alexander Reeves, who had been watching the exchange with obvious amusement, added his opinion. This is exactly why we need to revisit the hiring practices. Some people simply don't understand sophisticated humor or the nuances of luxury service. Sophisticated humor? Michael questioned sharply. Is that what you call thinly veiled racism and sexual harassment? No one is being racist, Victoria insisted with a practiced, offended tone. We simply expect a certain standard of service when we pay for first class. If pointing that out makes us racist, then the word has lost all meaning. The mental gymnastics you're performing would win Olympic gold, Michael replied dryly. Richard. Thornton stood abruptly, his imposing frame looming over Jasmine. I've had enough of this. I want to speak to the head flight attendant immediately. These two need to be disciplined, and I want it documented. Jasmine didn't back down. Sir, I need to ask you to return to your seat. We're still at cruising altitude, and for safety reasons, Don't you dare lecture me about airline safety, Richard interrupted. I probably own more shares in this company than your entire family will earn in a lifetime. When I want something on this aircraft, it happens. The situation was escalating dangerously. In the corner of her eye, Jasmine noticed Diane Cooper, the head flight attendant, approaching cautiously. She also spotted the air marshal seated in business class beginning to take notice of the disturbance. Mr. Thornton, Jasmine began again, her voice calm but firm. I understand you're upset. If you'd like to file a formal complaint, we have procedures for that. But right now I need to ask you to return to your seat and lower your voice. And I need you to understand who you're talking to, Richard replied, jabbing a finger toward her. One word from me at tomorrow's board meeting, and diversity hires like you will be the first to go. Brad, emboldened by his father's aggression, stood as well. Why wait until tomorrow? Let's talk to the pilot right now. I'm sure he'll be interested to know how his staff are treating their most valuable passengers. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers were watching with expressions ranging from discomfort to indignation. Michael Chen had positioned himself strategically closer to Jasmine and Gabriella, clearly ready to intervene if necessary. Diane finally reached them, her face a mask of professional concern. Is there a problem here? There certainly is, Richard declared. Your staff are being insubordinate and disrespectful. I want them removed from this cabin immediately. He's been harassing us, Gabriella countered, her voice tight with controlled anger, making racist comments and threats. Diane looked uncertainly between the wealthy, influential passengers and her staff. The conflict of interest was written clearly on her face. Protect her employees or appease powerful customers who could affect her own career. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding, Diane began diplomatically. The only misunderstanding, Richard interrupted, is that these women seem to think their feelings matter more than proper service. That's enough. The new voice belonged to the air marshal, who had approached quietly during the confrontation. Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately. And who are you? Richard demanded. Federal Air Marshal, and right now you're creating a disturbance that could potentially endanger this flight. Richard's expression fluctuated between rage and calculation. The presence of law enforcement changed the dynamic, introducing consequences beyond the reach of his influence. This isn't over, he muttered, finally returning to his seat. Not by a long shot. As the group dispersed, Jasmine felt her phone vibrate. Stepping into the galley, she checked it discreetly. A message from Marcus. Everything okay up there? Getting reports of a disturbance. She typed quickly. Situation contained. Thornton Group becoming aggressive. Will provide full details later. His response came immediately. Understood. Protocol Sapphire if needed. Protocol Sapphire was their prearranged code for revealing her identity if the situation became untenable. Jasmine considered it briefly, then decided against it. Less than 24 hours remained before the official announcement. Revealing herself now would be satisfying but potentially chaotic mid-flight. Gabriella joined her in the galley, her hands shaking slightly from adrenaline. I'm sorry, Jasmine. I shouldn't have responded to them, but the things they were saying... Don't apologize, Jasmine assured her. You stood up for yourself and you were right to do so. But I might have cost us both our jobs, Gabriella said worriedly. You know how these things go. It doesn't matter who's right, it matters who has power. Jasmine smiled slightly. Sometimes power isn't what it appears to be. Gabriella studied her friend's face. You keep saying things like that. What aren't you telling me? Before Jasmine could respond, Diane approached them, her expression grim. I need statements from both of you about what happened. And Jasmine, I need to inform you that Mr. Thornton has demanded you be removed from service for the remainder of the flight. Of course he has, Jasmine said calmly. This is ridiculous, Gabriella protested. He was the one causing problems. It doesn't matter, Diane said wearily. He's threatened to call William Wright personally if we don't comply. We can't risk that kind of conflict with leadership. A small, ironic smile played at the corners of Jasmine's mouth. No, I suppose we can't. I'm sorry, Jasmine, Diane continued, not noticing her expression. But I'll need you to remain in the crew rest area for the remainder of the flight. Emma will cover your section. Jasmine nodded, maintaining her composure. I understand. As Diane left to manage the still tense cabin, Gabriella turned to Jasmine with disbelief. You're just accepting this? They're completely in the wrong, and you're being punished. Trust me, Gabriella, Jasmine said, gathering her items. Sometimes the long game is more important than the immediate battle. Gabriella shook her head in frustration. I don't understand how you can be so calm about this. Jasmine paused, considering her words carefully. Let's just say I have perspective that you don't, and after tomorrow, things will be very different. With those cryptic words, Jasmine headed toward the crew rest area, leaving Gabriella puzzled but intrigued. As she settled into the small space where she would spend the remainder of the flight, Jasmine began typing detailed notes about the incident on her phone. Every word, every action, every participant, all documented for reference at tomorrow's meeting. The breaking point had been reached, but not in the way Richard Thornton anticipated. What he viewed as a victory, having her removed from his presence, was actually providing her with the time and privacy to prepare for what would come next. Tomorrow, the true breaking point would arrive, and the fracture lines would run in very different directions than anyone in that first-class cabin could possibly imagine. Jasmine remained in the crew rest area for nearly an hour, meticulously documenting every aspect of the confrontation with the Thornton group. Her fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, recording dialogue, behaviors, and witnesses, building an irrefutable case that would soon become very relevant. A soft knock on the door interrupted her focus. Gabriella peered in, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. How are you holding up? She asked, slipping inside and closing the door. I'm fine, Jasmine assured her. More concerned about you, actually. You're still out there dealing with them. Gabriella shrugged. They've calmed down somewhat. The air marshal's presence helped, but they're still making snide comments whenever I'm in earshot. Document everything, Jasmine advised. Times, exact words, witnesses. Gabriella tilted her head, studying her friend. You've been saying cryptic things all day, and you're unusually calm about being unjustly confined here while they continue their bad behavior. Jasmine considered her response carefully. Gabriella had become a genuine friend over the past 6 months, and she deserved some level of honesty. However, revealing her true identity now could complicate an already volatile situation. Let's just say I have good reason to believe this won't end the way they think it will, Jasmine finally replied. That's still cryptic, Gabriella pointed, out with a half smile. I know, and I'm sorry, but after tomorrow, everything will make sense. I promise. Gabriella seemed ready to press further when another knock interrupted them. Diane opened the door without waiting for a response. We have a situation, she announced tensely. Richard Thornton is demanding to speak to the captain. He's becoming increasingly agitated, and the air marshal is concerned about escalation. What exactly does he want? Jasmine asked. He's insisting that both you and Gabriella should be suspended immediately, not just removed from the cabin. He wants the captain to radio ahead to Los Angeles to have HR representatives meet the plane to process your termination. That's completely out of protocol, Gabriella protested. The captain doesn't have that authority. I know that, and you know that, Diane replied wearily. But Mr. Thornton believes his influence supersedes standard procedures. He's threatening to call William Wright directly and have the entire cabin crew replaced if his demands aren't met. Jasmine suppressed a smile at the irony. And what does the captain say? Captain Rivera is reluctant to become involved in a cabin service dispute. He's suggested that Mr. Thornton document his complaints for review upon landing, but that's only made him more insistent. Diane hesitated. Jasmine, he's specifically focused on you. He keeps saying you're emblematic of everything wrong with the airline's direction. I see. Jasmine considered the situation. And what would you like me to do? Diane looked uncomfortable. The captain has suggested that perhaps you could speak with Mr. Thornton directly. A personal apology might diffuse the situation. An apology? Gabriella exclaimed incredulously. For what? Being harassed and discriminated against? For any misunderstanding, Diane clarified hastily. We just need to get through this flight without further incident. Jasmine stood, straightening her uniform. I'll speak with him. Jasmine, no, Gabriella protested. You shouldn't have to apologize to that man. I didn't say I would apologize, Jasmine replied calmly. I said I would speak with him. Something in her tone caused both Diane and Gabriella to look at her with newfound curiosity. There was an authority in her voice that seemed oddly incongruous with her position. Jasmine followed Diane back to the first-class cabin, where the tension was immediately apparent. Richard Thornton was standing despite the seatbelt sign being illuminated, gesturing emphatically as he spoke to the air marshal. Brad lounged in his seat with a smug expression, while Victoria and Alexander watched with poorly concealed amusement. Several other passengers, including Michael Chen, observed the scene with evident disapproval. Ah, here she is now, Richard announced as he spotted Jasmine. The source of the problem. Jasmine approached with measured steps, stopping at a professional distance. Mr. Thornton, I understand you wanted to speak with me. Speak with you is putting it mildly, Richard replied coldly. I want you to understand exactly who you're dealing with and the consequences of your actions today. I'm listening, Jasmine said simply. Her calm response seemed to irritate him further. He had clearly expected fear or defensiveness, not this composed confidence. Do you have any idea who I am? Richard demanded, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Yes, Mr. Thornton. You're a hedge fund manager and a significant investor in Sapphire Airways. More than significant, he corrected sharply. I'm the largest individual shareholder outside the Wright family themselves. I have William Wright's personal phone number. One call from me, and your career in aviation is over. Jasmine nodded thoughtfully. That's quite an impressive level of influence. Her measured response wasn't providing the emotional reaction Richard clearly craved. He continued, his voice rising slightly. I've been flying first class on this airline since before you were hired. I've generated millions in revenue and brought countless elite clients to Sapphire. And this is how I'm treated? By someone who clearly doesn't understand the standards expected in premium service? What standards would those be exactly? Jasmine asked, her voice level, but with an undercurrent of steel that hadn't been present before. Excuse me? Richard seemed taken aback by the direct question. You've mentioned standards several times. I'm curious what specific standards you believe I've failed to meet. The directness of her question created an uncomfortable moment. Richard glanced at his companions, who offered silent encouragement. Respect for one, he finally stated. Deference to passengers who pay premium prices. Understanding your role in the customer experience. I see. And how would you define respect in this context? Richard's irritation grew more visible. Don't play semantic games with me. You know exactly what I mean. Actually, I don't, Jasmine replied. Because from my perspective, respect should be mutual. I've treated you and your companions with professional courtesy throughout this flight, despite receiving none in return. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Other passengers were now openly watching the confrontation, with several nodding in agreement with Jasmine's assessment. This is precisely what I'm talking about, Richard said to the air marshal. Insubordination, challenging a passenger instead of providing service. Answering your question honestly isn't insubordination, Mr. Thornton, Jasmine countered. It's communication. Richard's face flushed with anger. I don't need to be lectured by someone whose job depends on my satisfaction. Actually, my job depends on safely transporting all passengers to their destination while maintaining a secure and respectful environment on board, Jasmine corrected him. Satisfaction is important, but not at the expense of dignity. For passengers, or crew, Brad Thornton snorted derisively. Listen to her, talking about dignity when she can't even serve a drink without spilling it. A drink that your father deliberately caused to spill, Michael Chen interjected from nearby. I saw it clearly, as did several other passengers. No one asked for your input, Richard snapped at Michael before turning back to Jasmine. I want your employee number and full name. I'll be speaking directly with William Wright about this. Tomorrow." A subtle smile touched Jasmine's lips. "I'm sure you will." Something in her tone caused Richard to pause, studying her more carefully. "You find this amusing? Your career is on the line." "Mr. Thornton," Jasmine replied evenly, "I've documented every interaction we've had today, every comment about diversity hires, every instance of harassment, every discriminatory remark you and your associates have made about staff of color. I've noted the witnesses, times, and exact wording." Richard's expression flickered momentarily before hardening again. "Documenting your perceived slights won't help you. It's your word against mine, and I can guarantee whose account will carry more weight with management." "Perhaps," Jasmine acknowledged. "But I wonder how those comments would be received by the public if they were to become known. Sapphire Airways has built its brand on exclusive luxury, yes, but also on ethical treatment of staff and passengers alike." Victoria Carmichael leaned forward. "Are you threatening us with some kind of public relations smear? Because I assure you, that would constitute defamation." "Not at all, Ms. Carmichael. I'm simply pointing out that actions and words have consequences for everyone, regardless of their position or wealth." The subtle shift in power dynamics was becoming apparent to everyone in the cabin. What had begun as a wealthy passenger asserting dominance over service staff had transformed into something more balanced and confusing for the Thornton Group. The air marshal, who had been observing silently, now stepped forward. "Mr. Thornton, I need to ask you to return to your seat. The seatbelt sign is still illuminated, and this conversation is not resolving productively." "Not until I get her name and employee number," Richard insisted. Jasmine reached into her pocket and produced a business card. Not her flight attendant identification, but something else. She held it for a moment without extending it. "Mr. Thornton, perhaps we should continue this discussion after we land. I believe it would be more productive for everyone." "I don't want to continue it later. I want your information now so I can ensure you're dealt with appropriately," Richard demanded. Jasmine finally extended the card, watching carefully as Richard snatched it from her fingers. For a moment, he stared at it in confusion. Then his eyes widened, his face cycling through expressions of disbelief, shock, and finally dawning horror. This is some kind of joke," he stammered, looking between the card and Jasmine's face. "I assure you it's not, Mr. Thornton." Jasmine's voice remained professional, but there was a new note of authority that hadn't been present before. Brad leaned over to look at the card. "What is it? What does it say?" Richard seemed unable to answer, his face paling visibly. Jasmine spoke into the tense silence. "Mr. Thornton, I believe you wanted to discuss the airline's direction and leadership tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that conversation as well." With that enigmatic statement, she turned and walked calmly back toward the galley, leaving Richard Thornton staring after her in stunned silence, the business card trembling slightly in his hand. In the galley, Gabriella was waiting with barely contained curiosity. "What happened? What did you say to him? He looks like he's seen a ghost." "Let's just say Mr. Thornton has received some unexpected information," Jasmine replied. "I suspect the remainder of the flight will be much quieter." As if on cue, they heard the air marshal instructing Richard to return to his seat, a request that was now met with silent compliance rather than further argument. "Jasmine," Gabriella said quietly, "who are you really?" Jasmine met her friend's gaze directly. "Someone who believes that every person deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their position. Someone who's been learning a lot about this airline from the inside out. And someone who's looking forward to tomorrow's company meeting very much." Before Gabriella could press further, Diane approached, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "What did you say to him? Richard Thornton looks like he's in shock and he's not saying a word to anyone." "I simply provided him with some perspective," Jasmine answered. "I don't anticipate any further issues from him for the remainder of the flight." Diane shook her head in bewilderment. "I don't understand what's happening, but the captain has asked me to inform you that you're cleared to return to regular service if you feel comfortable doing so." "Thank you, Diane. I'd be happy to resume my duties." As Diane walked away, still visibly confused, Jasmine's phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. "Air Marshal reported incident contained. Status update?" She typed back quickly. "Situation. Resolved. Card provided to RT. Anticipate smooth landing." The reply came immediately. "Bold move. William aware and supportive. See you at LAX." Jasmine tucked her phone away and turned to Gabriella with a small smile. "Shall we get back to work? We still have passengers to serve." "Including Mr. Thornton?" Gabriella asked uncertainly. "Especially Mr. Thornton," Jasmine replied. "Professional service for all passengers regardless of behavior. That's the standard we uphold at Sapphire Airways." As they re-entered the cabin, Jasmine noted with satisfaction that Richard Thornton had indeed returned to his seat. The card she had given him lay on his tray table, a business card identifying Jasmine Wright as the incoming Chief Operating Officer of Sapphire Airways and daughter of founder William Wright. The confrontation had reached its climax, but the true reckoning was still to come. And for that, Jasmine would need the formal setting of tomorrow's company meeting, where the power dynamics would shift permanently and irrevocably. What do you think will happen at tomorrow's company meeting? Comment number 1 if you think Richard and his group will try to save face and apologize, or comment number 2 if you believe they'll double down and try to challenge Jasmine's new authority. Like and subscribe to see the dramatic conclusion of this story. But here's what I'm wondering. After experiencing such blatant discrimination firsthand, what changes will Jasmine implement at the airline? And how will the board react to her undercover discoveries? As Flight SA 1125 began its journey across the Rocky Mountains, the mood in the first-class cabin had transformed dramatically. The once boisterous group led by Richard Thornton had fallen into a stunned silence, conversing only in hushed whispers. Richard himself sat rigidly in his seat, mechanically sipping water and ignoring the concerned questions from his companions. Victoria Carmichael leaned across the aisle, her voice barely audible. "Richard, what exactly did that card say? You look as though you've received terrible news." Richard shook his head slightly, unwilling to verbalize the revelation that had shaken him to his core. The business card remained face down on his tray table, as if he couldn't bear to look at it again. Brad, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued to drink champagne. "I don't understand why you're suddenly so quiet, Dad. So what if she filed some complaint? By tomorrow she'll be out of a job anyway." "It's not that simple," Richard finally muttered, shooting a warning glance at his son to lower his voice. Meanwhile, Jasmine had resumed her duties with composed professionalism, serving passengers in both sections of first class. When she approached Michael Chen's seat, he regarded her with newfound understanding. "Things make more sense now," he said quietly as she refreshed his drink, "though I'm still processing the implications." "I appreciate your earlier support, Mr. Chen," Jasmine replied. "It's passengers like you who represent the true spirit of Sapphire Airways." "I look forward to tomorrow's meeting with even greater interest now," Michael commented. "I suspect it will be quite enlightening." Jasmine smiled diplomatically. "I believe it will be transformative for many involved." As she moved through the cabin, Jasmine noticed dark clouds gathering outside the aircraft windows. The captain's voice soon came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Rivera speaking. We're approaching an area of turbulence over the Rockies. I've illuminated the seatbelt sign and asked the cabin crew to suspend service temporarily. Please return to your seats and secure any loose items." Jasmine and Gabriella efficiently cleared, serving items and ensured the cabin was prepared for turbulence. As they finished their safety checks, the first jolts rocked the aircraft, causing several passengers to gasp involuntarily. "Standard mountain turbulence," Jasmine reassured a nervous passenger. "Completely normal for this route." The turbulence intensified as the aircraft navigated through building storm clouds. Gabriella rejoined Jasmine in the forward galley, securing the service carts. "Captain says it might get a bit rough," Gabriella said quietly. "Unexpected weather. System developing." Jasmine nodded, her trained eye evaluating the cabin for potential hazards. "All passengers secured. All except..." Gabriella began, then stopped as they both noticed Richard Thornton rising from his seat despite the illuminated seatbelt sign. He moved unsteadily toward them, bracing himself against seat backs as the aircraft continued to bounce. Through rough air, his face was flushed, suggesting he'd continued drinking despite his earlier shock. "I need to speak with you," he demanded, addressing Jasmine directly. "Privately. Mr. Thornton, I need to ask you to return to your seat. Immediately," Jasmine responded firmly. "We're experiencing significant turbulence and it's unsafe for you to be standing." "Don't lecture me about airline safety," Richard retorted, his earlier subdued demeanor giving way to renewed belligerence. "I've been flying longer than you've been alive. This is nothing." As if to contradict him, the aircraft suddenly dropped several feet, causing Richard to stumble against a seat. Jasmine instinctively reached out to stabilize him, but he shrugged off her assistance. "Sir, please return to your seat now," Jasmine insisted, her voice carrying the authority of a safety officer rather than a service provider. "Not until we clarify a few things," Richard persisted. "That card you gave me can be discussed after we land safely," Jasmine interrupted. "Right now, your safety and the safety of everyone on board requires you to be seated with your seatbelt fastened." The turbulence intensified further, the aircraft now shuddering continuously as it fought through powerful air currents. The captain's voice returned over the intercom, tension evident even through his professional tone. "Cabin crew, secure for severe turbulence." This was not a request, but an urgent command. Jasmine and Gabriella exchanged alarmed glances. Severe turbulence was significantly more dangerous than the moderate designation they had expected. "Mr. Thornton, you need to sit down immediately," Jasmine stated, no longer making a request but giving a direct order. Richard wavered, clearly torn between his desire to confront her and the increasingly obvious danger of remaining standing. Before he could decide, the aircraft encountered an air pocket, dropping sharply before bouncing upward with violent force. Richard lost his balance completely, lurching sideways toward the overhead bins. In the same instant, one of the bins above him popped open from the force of the turbulence, sending a heavy laptop bag hurtling toward his head. Acting on pure instinct and years of emergency training, Jasmine lunged forward, shoving Richard out of the direct path of the falling bag. The laptop missed his head but struck his shoulder with enough force to spin him around. Off balance and disoriented, he stumbled into a seated passenger who cried out in pain. The cabin erupted in alarmed voices as Jasmine and Gabriella worked quickly to control the situation. "Medical kit," Jasmine called to Gabriella, who immediately retrieved the emergency medical supplies. The passenger Richard had fallen against, an elderly woman, was clutching her arm and wincing in pain. Meanwhile, Richard himself was sprawled awkwardly in the aisle, stunned but apparently not seriously injured. Jasmine knelt beside the elderly passenger first. "Ma'am, can you tell me where it hurts?" "My wrist," the woman replied through gritted teeth. "When he fell against me, my arm got twisted." Jasmine performed a quick assessment, concluding the woman had likely sprained her wrist rather than broken it. She applied an ice pack and a temporary brace from the medical kit. Only then did she turn her attention to Richard, who was now sitting up in the aisle, rubbing his shoulder where the laptop had struck him. "Are you injured, Mr. Thornton?" Jasmine asked professionally, despite everything that had transpired between them. "You pushed me," he accused, his voice a mixture of pain and indignation. "I redirected you away from a falling object that would have struck your head," Jasmine corrected him. "Now I need to know if you're injured so I can provide appropriate medical assistance." The aircraft continued to shake violently around them, making even seated positions precarious. The air marshal had made his way to their location and was now assisting Jasmine. "Sir, we need to get you into a seat immediately," the air marshal insisted. Together, they helped Richard into the nearest empty seat, which happened to be beside Michael Chen. As they secured his seatbelt, Richard continued to protest. "She deliberately pushed me into that woman," he insisted, pointing at the elderly passenger. "She could have killed us both." "I saw the entire incident, Mr. Thornton," Michael stated firmly. "Ms. Wright prevented a much more serious injury by redirecting the laptop's impact from your head to your shoulder. You should be thanking her, not accusing her." Brad Thornton, watching from his seat, had pulled out his phone and was recording the scene despite the turbulence and explicit instructions to secure all electronic devices. "This is going viral," he announced with malicious satisfaction. Flight attendant assaults premium passenger during turbulence. "Sir, turn off that device immediately," Gabriella ordered, noticing the recording. "It's a violation of safety protocols during severe turbulence." "Freedom of the press," Brad replied smugly. "The public deserves to see how Sapphire Airways staff treat their best customers," the air marshal intervened. "That's not a request, sir. It's a federal regulation. Turn off the device now or I'll be forced to confiscate it." Brad reluctantly lowered the phone, but not before making a show of uploading the video. Too late, it's already online. Jasmine, focused on ensuring all passengers were secure rather than Brad's provocation, continued moving efficiently through the cabin, checking seatbelts and securing loose items. The turbulence showed no signs of abating. If anything, it was intensifying. A particularly violent jolt sent a drink cart they thought was secured rolling dangerously down the aisle. Jasmine reacted instantly, throwing herself against it to stop its momentum before it could injure anyone. The impact was painful, but she managed to halt the heavy cart and secure it properly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Rivera's voice came, over the intercom again. "We are diverting slightly south to avoid the worst of this weather system. Please remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened tightly. Cabin crew, continue to secure the cabin and then take your jump seats." Richard, still nursing his injured shoulder, raised his voice again. "You should have warned us this was coming. Where was the announcement about severe turbulence? This is gross negligence." "The severity of the turbulence was unexpected, Mr. Thornton," Jasmine explained calmly while continuing her safety checks. "The weather system intensified rapidly. That's why it's critical to keep your seatbelt fastened whenever you're seated, regardless of whether the sign is illuminated." "Don't lecture me about airline safety," Richard repeated his earlier complaint. "I know more about running an airline than you ever will." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on several passengers who had observed the earlier confrontation and now understood Jasmine's true identity. A few sympathetic glances were directed her way as she professionally ignored the provocation and continued ensuring passenger safety. The turbulence began to ease gradually as the aircraft navigated around the worst of the storm system. Captain Rivera announced they were clear of the immediate danger, though the seatbelt sign would remain illuminated as a precaution. Once all passengers were confirmed secure, and the elderly woman with the sprained wrist was comfortable, Jasmine finally took her jump seat beside Gabriella for the remainder of the turbulent passage. "That was intense," Gabriella whispered. "Are you okay? I saw you take a hit from that cart." "I'm fine," Jasmine assured her, though her side was throbbing where she'd impacted the heavy metal cart. "Just another day in paradise." "A paradise where passengers record you doing your job and try to use it against you," Gabriella muttered. Brad uploaded that video before the air marshal could stop him. "Let him," Jasmine replied with surprising calmness. "The complete footage will tell a very different story than the narrative he's trying to create." As the aircraft continued its journey through lighter turbulence, Jasmine observed the Thornton group huddled in intense conversation. Richard appeared to be filling Victoria and Alexander in on the revelation from the business card, judging by their shocked expressions and frequent glances in her direction. Brad, oblivious to the significance of what had transpired, continued to check his phone whenever the air marshal wasn't looking, presumably monitoring the response to his uploaded video. "It's already getting traction," he announced loudly enough for Jasmine to hear. #Angry Black Flight Attendant is trending in Los Angeles. That's what happens when you mess with passengers who have influence. Jasmine didn't respond to the provocation, instead focusing on checking in with each passenger affected by the turbulence. When she reached the elderly woman with the sprained wrist, she found Michael Chen had changed seats to sit beside her, offering comfort and assistance. "Ms. Abernathy was just telling me she's a retired flight attendant herself," Michael informed Jasmine. 40 years with Pan Am and then Delta. "It was different in my day," Ms. Abernathy said, adjusting the ice pack on her wrist. "But some things never change, like rich folks thinking the rules don't apply to them during turbulence." Jasmine smiled. "Thank you for your understanding, Ms. Abernathy. We'll have medical personnel meet the aircraft to properly examine your wrist when we land." "Don't you worry about me, honey," the older woman replied. "I've seen worse. Though I must say your quick action with that cart was impressive. In my day, we'd have recommended you for a safety commendation." "Just doing my job," Jasmine responded modestly. "And doing it exceptionally well," Michael added. "I've flown millions of miles, and I've rarely seen cabin crew handle an emergency with such composure and effectiveness." Their conversation was interrupted by Richard Thornton's voice from across the cabin. "She deliberately endangered passengers. That's what happened." He was addressing Victoria and Alexander, but his voice was pitched to carry throughout the cabin, clearly intended for public consumption rather than private conversation. "If she had simply allowed me to return to my seat instead of confronting me, none of this would have happened," he continued, constructing his alternate narrative. "The elderly woman's injury is a direct result of her aggression." Several passengers who had witnessed the actual events exchanged skeptical glances. Ms. Abernathy herself shook her head in disgust. "That man would blame the pilot for rain," she remarked dryly. Jasmine remained professional, refusing to engage in a public dispute. Instead, she returned to the galley to check in with Diane, who was coordinating with the captain about their arrival procedures. "Medical team confirmed for our arrival," Diane informed her. "And—" she hesitated, looking uncomfortable. "Marcus Reynolds will be meeting the aircraft personally. Apparently there's been some kind of situation involving the Thorntons." "You could say that," Jasmine acknowledged. "It's being handled." Diane studied her with newfound curiosity. "There's something else going on, isn't there? Richard Thornton is acting like he's seen a ghost, and now the CEO is personally meeting our flight." "All will become clear soon," Jasmine assured her. "For now, let's focus on landing safely and ensuring Ms. Abernathy receives proper medical attention." As they prepared the cabin for descent into Los Angeles, Jasmine received a text from Marcus. "Video circulating. PR handling. William aware and supportive. Security will escort Thornton Group to private meeting room upon arrival." She replied, simply, "Understood. Proceeding as planned." When she returned to the cabin for final landing preparations, the atmosphere remained tense. Richard avoided eye contact completely, while Brad continued his attempts at provocation. "The internet never forgets," he commented as she passed. "Your career is over, you know. Even if my father can't make it happen, social media will." Jasmine paused, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Mr. Thornton, I'd suggest focusing on our safe arrival rather than social media at the moment. The complete story isn't always captured in a selectively edited clip." "The clip speaks for itself," Brad insisted. "Angry black flight attendant assaults premium passenger." "Interesting narrative," Michael Chen interjected from nearby. "Though not one supported by the dozens of witnesses in this cabin, including me." "No one's asking for your opinion," Brad snapped. "Actually," Michael replied calmly, "the authorities might. Falsely accusing someone of assault while deliberately omitting context could potentially be considered defamation." Brad's smug expression faltered slightly. The aircraft began its final approach into Los Angeles International Airport, the city lights twinkling through scattered clouds below. As the landing gear deployed with a reassuring thud, Jasmine completed her final safety checks, professional, to the very end of this extraordinary flight. After a smooth landing and taxi to the gate, Captain Rivera's voice came over the intercom for the final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. Local time is 4:42 p.m., and the temperature is 72 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate, and the seatbelt sign has been turned off." As passengers gathered their belongings following the all-clear, Jasmine noticed Richard Thornton checking his phone with increasing agitation. Whatever message he'd received clearly wasn't welcome news. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to Victoria and Alexander. "Apparently we're being escorted to a private meeting room upon arrival." "What are we, criminals?" "I told you that card was significant," Victoria hissed. "What exactly did it say, Richard?" Before he could respond, the aircraft door opened, and Marcus Reynolds himself appeared at the entrance, an unusual occurrence for a CEO who typically remained in corporate headquarters. "Welcome to Los Angeles," Marcus announced smoothly. "We have medical personnel standing by for anyone who experienced injuries during the turbulence. For the comfort of all passengers, we'll be conducting a controlled disembarkation." His eyes scanned the cabin, briefly meeting Jasmine's with a subtle nod before focusing on the Thornton group. "Mr. Thornton, Ms. Carmichael, Mr. Reeves, and Mr. Thornton Jr., we have arranged a private reception for you. If you would kindly follow our representatives once the other passengers have disembarked." The formal, public nature of this announcement left Richard with no room to object without creating a scene. He nodded stiffly, his expression a mixture of anger and apprehension. As the regular passengers began to disembark, Michael Chen paused beside Jasmine. "I suspect tomorrow's meeting will be quite memorable," he said quietly. "I believe it will, Mr. Chen," Jasmine agreed. "And I look forward to continuing our conversation in a more formal setting." "As do I, Ms. Wright," he replied with a knowing smile before departing. Brad, overhearing this exchange, looked between them in confusion. "Wright? Like William Wright?" Jasmine merely offered a professional smile. "Have a pleasant evening, Mr. Thornton. I'll see you tomorrow." The bewilderment on his face was the first genuinely satisfying moment of the entire turbulent day. As the last regular passengers disembarked and the Thornton group prepared to follow Marcus, Richard finally approached Jasmine directly, his voice low and urgent. "This situation can be resolved amicably," he offered, desperation evident in his tone. "Whatever misunderstanding has occurred, I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement." "I look forward to discussing that tomorrow, Mr. Thornton," Jasmine replied evenly, "along with your vision for the future of Sapphire Airways." His face paled at her reference to his earlier comments about reshaping the airline. Without another word, he followed Marcus off the aircraft, his usual commanding presence notably diminished. Gabriella approached Jasmine as the last passengers departed. "Okay, you have to tell me what's happening. Why is the CEO personally escorting them? And why did Michael Chen call you Ms. Wright?" Jasmine smiled at her friend. "Gabriella, I promised everything would make sense tomorrow, and it will. But I will tell you this. You might want to prepare yourself for some surprising news at tomorrow's company anniversary celebration." Outside the aircraft windows, Jasmine could see Richard and his group being led to a waiting Sapphire Airways executive vehicle, their expressions suggesting they were heading not to a celebration, but to a reckoning that had been 6 months in the making. The storm had passed, both the literal turbulence and the confrontation that had defined this flight. But for Richard Thornton and his associates, the real tempest was just beginning. What would you do if you were in Jasmine's position now? Comment number 1 if you would be direct and confront the Thorntons about their behavior immediately, or comment number 2 if you would wait for the formal company meeting to reveal everything. Like and subscribe to find out what happens next in this dramatic showdown. I'm wondering, how will the board members react when they discover the truth about Jasmine's undercover mission? And what consequences await Richard and his entitled friends? The evening air in Los Angeles carried a hint of jasmine and salt as Jasmine Wright finally exited the aircraft after completing her post-flight duties. The irony of concluding her 6-month undercover assignment with such dramatic events wasn't lost on her. What had begun as a methodical evaluation of company operations had culminated in a direct confrontation with the very people threatening her father's legacy. "Ms. Wright?" Jasmine turned to find a Sapphire Airways security officer waiting for her at the jet bridge entrance. "Yes?" "Mr. Reynolds asked me to escort you directly to headquarters. Your luggage will be delivered separately, and a change of clothes is waiting for you there." She nodded, unsurprised by Marcus's thoroughness. "Thank you. Let me just say, goodbye to my crew." Gabriella and the other flight attendants were gathered near the gate, debriefing with Diane about the turbulence incident. They all looked up as Jasmine approached. "I need to handle some business at headquarters," Jasmine explained, conscious of not revealing too much. "I'll see you all tomorrow at the anniversary celebration." Gabriella studied her face suspiciously. "This is about what happened with the Thorntons, isn't it? Why are you going to headquarters instead of the hotel?" "All will become clear tomorrow," Jasmine promised, giving her friend a quick hug. "Get some rest. It's been quite a flight." As she walked away with the security officer, Jasmine overheard Diane commenting to the others, "Something very strange is happening. First the CEO meets our flight, now security escorts for flight attendants." The drive from LAX to Sapphire Airways' gleaming headquarters in downtown Los Angeles took 40 minutes in early evening traffic. Jasmine used the time to compose detailed notes about the flight, while events were still fresh in her mind. Occasionally, she checked social media, where Brad Thornton's selectively edited video was indeed circulating, though with considerably less traction than he had boasted on the flight. "PR is already managing the video situation," the security officer mentioned, noticing her scrolling through the posts. "Our statement emphasizes the safety actions taken during unexpected severe turbulence, with support from multiple passenger witnesses." "Good," Jasmine replied, "though I suspect after tomorrow it will become a non-issue." When they arrived at the modernist glass tower that housed Sapphire Airways' corporate offices, Jasmine was escorted through a private entrance and up to the executive floor, a stark contrast to the employee entrances she'd been using for the past 6 months. Marcus Reynolds was waiting in the conference room adjacent to the CEO office, along with Patricia Moore, the company's chief legal counsel, and David Zhang, head of public relations. "Welcome back to your natural habitat," Marcus greeted her, with a warm handshake. At 55, he carried his responsibilities with a comfortable confidence, having served as her father's right hand for nearly 2 decades. "Though I must say, you made quite an exit from your undercover role." "Not exactly how I planned it," Jasmine admitted, taking a seat at the polished conference table. "But perhaps illuminating nonetheless." "Illuminating is one word for it," Patricia commented, sliding a tablet toward Jasmine. "We've been monitoring the social media situation. Mr. Thornton Jr.'s video has received approximately 20,000 views, but the comments are overwhelmingly skeptical of his characterization of events." Jasmine scrolled through the feed, noting comments like "convenient editing much?" and "show the full video or it didn't happen like you claim." "Several passengers have already contacted us offering their accounts of what actually occurred," David added, including a Ms. Abernathy, who apparently has quite the following among retired airline employees. Her version of events directly contradicts the Thornton narrative. "And Michael Chen," Marcus interjected, "who not only witnessed everything but has apparently been recording his own travels for a documentary about luxury service industries. He has offered to provide his complete unedited footage if needed." Jasmine smiled at this unexpected development. "That could be useful. Where are the Thorntons now?" "Cooling their heels in the executive reception area downstairs," Marcus replied with slight satisfaction. "Richard demanded to speak with your father immediately, but William is resting at home in preparation for tomorrow. I informed Richard that all concerns would be addressed at tomorrow's meeting." "How did he take that?" Jasmine asked. "About as well as you'd expect," Marcus said dryly. "He threatened everything from legal action to withdrawing his investment, but when I mentioned that we have comprehensive documentation of today's events, including witness statements and the aircraft's security footage, he became significantly more restrained." Patricia leaned forward. "Which brings us to tomorrow's strategy. William has reviewed your undercover reports in today's incident, and he's more convinced than ever that the leadership transition is necessary. The question is how to handle the Thornton situation specifically." "I have some thoughts on that," Jasmine replied, her expression determined. "But first, I received a message labeled Protocol Sapphire during the flight." "What exactly is that?" Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances before Marcus explained. "It's a contingency we developed in case your identity needed to be revealed mid-assignment due to an emergency. It would have involved the captain making an announcement verifying your identity." "I considered it," Jasmine acknowledged, "but decided it would create unnecessary chaos mid-flight." "A wise decision," Patricia confirmed. "Handling it in tomorrow's controlled environment will be much more effective." The conference room door opened, and a young assistant entered with a garment bag. "Your clothes for tomorrow, Ms. Wright, as requested." "Thank you, Emily," Jasmine replied, recognizing the assistant she hadn't seen in 6 months. After Emily departed, David outlined the media strategy for the announcement, We've prepared statements for various scenarios depending on how the Thornton Group responds to your revelation. We anticipate significant business media interest in both your appointment and your undercover methodology. Which brings us to the elephant in the room, Patricia interjected. The discriminatory behavior you documented both today and throughout your assignment. We need to address it, but carefully. I agree, Jasmine said. This isn't just about the Thorntons, though they exemplify the problem. It's about systemic issues that have developed within the company culture. Issues that contradict the founding principles my father established. Marcus nodded solemnly. William built this airline on the premise that luxury isn't just about expensive champagne and flatbed seats. It's about treating everyone, passengers and staff alike, with dignity and respect. Exactly, Jasmine agreed. And somewhere along the way, as we've grown and brought in more investors focused solely on returns, that vision has been diluted. The group continued strategizing well into the evening, refining the announcement and preparing for various reactions from board members, investors, and the media. By the time they concluded, it was nearly midnight. You should get some rest, Marcus advised Jasmine. Tomorrow will be intense. One more thing, Jasmine said as they gathered their materials. Gabriela Rodriguez, the flight attendant who stood up to the Thorntons with me. I want her involved in whatever comes next. The Dominican-American woman you've mentioned in several reports? Patricia clarified. Yes. She's experienced the same discrimination I witnessed, but without the privilege of knowing it was temporary. Her perspective would be invaluable in reshaping our corporate culture. Marcus made a note. I'll ensure she receives a special invitation to tomorrow's event. As Jasmine prepared to leave for the executive suite the company maintained for visiting dignitaries, her phone buzzed with a text from her father. Proud of you, Jasmine. Tomorrow, we set things right. She smiled, drawing strength from his confidence in her. The past 6 months had been challenging, experiencing firsthand the microaggressions and blatant discrimination that many employees faced daily. But tomorrow would mark the beginning of substantive changes. Jasmine paused at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Los Angeles, the city lights stretching to the horizon. Somewhere out there, Richard Thornton was likely plotting his response to the day's events, unaware that his position was even more precarious than he imagined. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for Sapphire Airways' 25th anniversary celebration. The event was being held at the company's headquarters in their spectacular sky lobby, a vast space with panoramic views of the city and mountains beyond. Jasmine arrived early, dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit that echoed Sapphire Airways colors, without mimicking the uniform she'd worn for the past 6 months. Her natural curls were styled elegantly, and she wore the silver wings pin prominently on her lapel, no longer a disguise but a symbol of pride in her family's legacy. Marcus met her in the private executive reception area. Everything's set. Your father arrived 30 minutes ago and is meeting with a few board members in his office. The Thornton Group has confirmed their attendance, but requested a brief private meeting beforehand. Declined, I assume? Jasmine asked. Of course. All discussions will happen in the proper forum. They reviewed final details as the venue began filling with executives, board members, major investors, and select employees from various departments. Jasmine noticed Gabriela arriving, looking slightly confused by her special invitation to an event usually reserved for management. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus stepped to the podium to begin the formal proceedings. The room quieted as he welcomed everyone to the 25th anniversary celebration of Sapphire Airways. Today marks not only a milestone in our company's history, but also the beginning of an exciting new chapter, Marcus announced. Before we proceed with the main announcement, I've received an urgent message. Would all board members, major shareholders, and yesterday's Flight SA 1125 crew please proceed to Boardroom A immediately for a brief pre-announcement meeting? Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the specified groups began moving toward the boardroom. Jasmine noticed Richard Thornton's expression, a mixture of confusion and apprehension as he and his associates joined the procession. Gabriela caught Jasmine's eye questioningly as she followed Diane and the other crew members. Jasmine herself remained in the reception area with Marcus, allowing the selected groups to assemble first. After giving them a few minutes, Marcus turned to her. "Ready to change the game?" he asked with a supportive smile. Jasmine took a deep breath, centering herself. "I've been ready for 6 months." Together, they walked toward Boardroom A, where the next phase of Sapphire Airways' future and the reckoning for Richard Thornton was about to begin. As they approached the boardroom doors, Jasmine received a text from her father. "Standing by in the connecting office. Will enter on cue." She smiled, tucking the phone away. The stage was set, all players assembled. It was time for the reveal that would transform Sapphire Airways from the inside out. Marcus opened the door, gesturing for Jasmine to enter first. As she stepped into the boardroom, conversations immediately hushed. The conference table was filled with board members and major investors on one side, including the visibly uncomfortable Thornton Group. The flight crew, including Gabriella, sat on the opposite side, clearly uncertain about why they had been included in such a high-level meeting. At the head of the table was an empty chair, the position traditionally occupied by William Wright. Beside it was another empty seat, presumably for Marcus. What no one expected was for Jasmine to walk confidently to the head of the table and stand behind William's chair, while Marcus took the position to her right. Richard Thornton's face cycled through confusion, recognition, and then alarm as he finally made the connection between the flight attendant who had served him and the poised executive, now commanding the room. "Good morning," Jasmine began, her voice clear and authoritative, entirely different from the deferential tone she had used as a flight attendant. "For those who don't know me, I'm Jasmine Wright, daughter of William Wright, and as of today, the new Chief Operating Officer of Sapphire Airways." The revelation sent a shockwave through the room. Gabriella's jaw literally dropped. Victoria Carmichael paled visibly. Brad Thornton looked between his father and Jasmine in confusion. "For the past 6 months," Jasmine continued, "I've been working undercover as a flight attendant, experiencing our airline from the perspective of our frontline staff. This immersive approach has provided insights that would have been impossible to gain from an executive office." Richard Thornton found his voice. "This is unprecedented and highly irregular. Actually, Mr. Thornton, it's perfectly aligned with my father's philosophy that truly understanding a business means knowing it from the ground up," Jasmine countered smoothly. "A philosophy that has built Sapphire Airways into the industry leader it is today." She paused, looking directly at Richard. "A philosophy that stands in stark contrast to the approach you outlined on yesterday's flight. An approach that prioritizes short-term shareholder returns over the dignity of our employees and the quality of service that differentiates us in the marketplace." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Private conversations during a flight hardly constitute a formal business proposal." "Perhaps not," Jasmine acknowledged, "but they do provide valuable insight into the vision certain investors have for this company, a vision that directly contradicts our founding principles." The tension in the room was palpable as Jasmine continued. "Yesterday's flight was intended to be my final undercover assignment before today's announcement. Instead, it became a perfect case study in exactly why this approach was necessary." She turned to the crew members. "What these board members and investors may not realize is that the treatment I experienced yesterday is something many of our staff endure regularly." Nods of agreement came from several crew members, including Gabriella, who was watching Jasmine with growing understanding and respect. "Before we proceed with the formal announcement, I've asked my father to join us for this preliminary discussion," Jasmine said, gesturing toward a side door. William Wright entered, his tall frame still commanding despite the cane he now used, due to recent health challenges. At 68, his silver hair and lined face reflected the decades he dedicated to building Sapphire Airways from a small charter service into an international luxury airline. "Good morning," William greeted the assembled group, taking the seat Jasmine had been standing behind. "I see my daughter has made quite an impression already." "William," Richard began immediately, "this situation yesterday was unfortunate, but I believe there have been significant misunderstandings." William raised a hand, silencing him effortlessly. "Richard, I've reviewed the comprehensive reports Jasmine has compiled over the past 6 months including detailed accounts of yesterday's events, corroborated by multiple witnesses and the aircraft's security footage. There has been no misunderstanding. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Thornton, for perhaps the first time in his professional life, found himself without an immediate retort. "Now," William continued, his voice firm but not unkind, "shall we proceed to the main event? I believe we have an anniversary to celebrate and a new chapter to announce." With that, he rose and gestured toward the door, indicating that the real confrontation, the public one, was yet to come. As the group filed out toward the main celebration area, Jasmine found herself walking beside Gabriella, who was still processing the revelation. 6 months, Gabriella whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "You were the owner's daughter the entire time." "And your friend," Jasmine replied sincerely. "That part was never an act." "But why? Why put yourself through that?" Jasmine glanced ahead at Richard Thornton's stiff back as he exited the boardroom. "Because some things can only be understood from the inside out, and some people only show their true nature when they think no one of consequence is watching." As they prepared to re-enter the main celebration area, Jasmine received a cryptic message from Marcus. Protocol Sapphire activated. The landing was just the beginning. She smiled, tucking her phone away. Indeed, the aircraft had landed safely, but the journey, the real one, was only just beginning. The grand reception hall of Sapphire Airways headquarters buzzed with anticipation as guests awaited the board members and special attendees returning from their private meeting. Elaborate decorations commemorating the airline's 25th anniversary adorned the space, silver and sapphire blue motifs capturing the company's evolution from a small regional carrier to a global luxury airline. As the boardroom doors opened and the procession returned, attendees couldn't help but notice the dramatically altered dynamics. William Wright entered first, walking with measured steps despite his cane, projecting the quiet confidence that had defined his leadership for a quarter-century. Marcus Reynolds followed close behind, but it was the next figure that drew curious glances and whispered questions. Jasmine Wright, striding purposefully in her executive attire, carrying herself with unmistakable authority. For most of the gathered employees and partners, this was their first glimpse of William Wright's daughter in a professional capacity, though rumors of her imminent appointment had circulated for weeks. Behind them came the board members and major investors, their expressions ranging from thoughtful to troubled. The Thornton Group in particular appeared visibly shaken. Richard's typically commanding presence had diminished, his shoulders slightly hunched as if bearing an invisible weight. Brad walked beside him, looking confused and irritated rather than chastened. Victoria Carmichael and Alexander Reeves followed, with carefully neutral expressions, though the tension in their postures betrayed their discomfort. Most puzzling to the onlookers was the inclusion of several uniformed flight attendants in this high-level procession. Gabriela Rodriguez walked with her head held high, occasionally exchanging glances with Jasmine that suggested a newly formed understanding between them. As the group took their places near the podium, Michael Chen entered from a side entrance, nodding respectfully to Jasmine before finding his seat. His presence as a potential new business partner had been expected, but the knowing smile he directed toward the Wright family suggested he was privy to information most attendees were not. Marcus approached the microphone, bringing the murmuring crowd to attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, valued employees, and partners of Sapphire Airways, welcome to our 25th anniversary celebration. Today we not only commemorate a remarkable journey of growth and excellence, but also look toward an exciting future." He gestured toward William Wright. "Our founder and chairman has led this company from a 3-aircraft charter service to one of the world's most respected luxury airlines. It is my honor to introduce William Wright." Applause filled the room as William took the podium, his presence commanding despite his physical frailty. 25 years, William began, his voice strong despite his recent health challenges. A quarter-century of striving for excellence, not merely in the amenities we provide, but in the fundamental respect with which we treat both our passengers and our people. He surveyed the room thoughtfully before continuing. "When I founded Sapphire Airways, many industry experts told me that luxury and compassion were incompatible, that an exclusive experience necessarily meant creating hierarchies of value among both customers and staff. I rejected that premise then, and I reject it now. William's gaze settled briefly on Richard Thornton before moving on. True luxury has never been about exclusion or disdain for those who provide service. It is about creating an environment where everyone, from the passenger in first class to the ground crew managing luggage, is treated with dignity and respect. The room had grown quiet, attendees sensing that this was more than standard anniversary rhetoric. As some of you know, health concerns have recently led me to reconsider my role within the company. While I will continue as chairman of the board, the day-to-day leadership of Sapphire Airways requires energy and vision that match the challenges of our rapidly changing industry. Anticipation rippled through the audience. Though leadership transition rumors had circulated, this was the first official confirmation. It is therefore with immense pride that I announce the appointment of our new Chief Operating Officer, who will work alongside CEO Marcus Reynolds to lead Sapphire Airways into its next chapter. William turned, extending his hand. Please welcome my daughter, Jasmine Wright. Applause erupted as Jasmine stepped forward to join her father at the podium. The response was generally enthusiastic, though notably restrained from certain board members and investors. Thank you, Father, Jasmine began, her poised demeanor revealing her executive training despite her months undercover. It is both an honor and a profound responsibility to help lead the company you built from the ground up. She turned to address the audience directly. Many of you are meeting me for the first time today, though I've spent my entire life learning this business, from helping to load catering trucks as a teenager to analyzing market strategies during my MBA studies. Jasmine paused, her expression growing more serious. But perhaps my most valuable education came during these past 6 months, during which time I worked anonymously as a Sapphire Airways flight attendant. A collective gasp swept through the room. Employees exchanged shocked glances. Even those who had anticipated her appointment had no idea about her undercover role. This was not a publicity stunt or a brief executive visit to the front lines, Jasmine clarified. It was a comprehensive immersion in the day-to-day realities of our operation, experiencing our company not from the privileged position of leadership, but from the perspective of those who directly serve our customers and represent our brand. She gestured toward Gabriella and the other flight attendants. These colleagues had no idea of my identity. To them, I was simply Jasmine, a new hire learning the ropes. The insights gained through this experience have been invaluable and will inform many of the initiatives I intend to implement as COO. Richard Thornton shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his expression darkening as he began to understand the full implications of her announcement. As it happens, Jasmine continued, my final undercover assignment was yesterday's flight SA-1125 from New York to Los Angeles, a flight carrying several board members and investors to today's celebration. She looked directly at the Thornton group now, her gaze steady and unyielding. That flight provided a particularly illuminating case study in both the strengths and challenges facing our company culture. Brad Thornton leaned toward his father, whispering urgently, but Richard silenced him with a sharp gesture, his eyes never leaving Jasmine. To illustrate these findings more concretely, Jasmine continued, I've prepared a brief presentation. The large screens throughout the reception hall, illuminated with the Sapphire Airways logo, then transitioned to security footage from the first-class cabin of yesterday's flight. The timestamp indicated early boarding procedures. The footage clearly showed Richard Thornton ignoring Jasmine as she offered assistance with his luggage, then cordially accepting the same help from Emma, the white flight attendant. Next came clips of Brad's inappropriate comments toward female staff, followed by the champagne incident, unmistakably showing Richard deliberately bumping Jasmine's arm to cause the spill, then berating her for the resulting accident. A murmur of discomfort spread through the audience as the footage continued, capturing snippets of conversation about diversity hires and plans to restructure the airline to prioritize shareholder returns over employee welfare. The most damning segment showed the confrontation during turbulence, clearly demonstrating that Jasmine had prevented a more serious injury by redirecting the falling laptop, contradicting the narrative Brad had attempted to spread through his edited social media video. When the presentation concluded, the room had fallen completely silent. Richard Thornton sat rigid with barely contained fury. Victoria Carmichael studied her manicure with intense focus, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Alexander Reeves had developed a sudden fascination with the ceiling. Brad, however, appeared oblivious to the gravity of the situation, still scrolling through his phone. Jasmine allowed the silence to linger momentarily before continuing. I want to be absolutely clear. This presentation is not about public humiliation or personal vendettas. It represents a factual documentation of behaviors that have been allowed to take root within our corporate culture, behaviors that directly contradict the founding principles of Sapphire Airways. William Wright nodded solemnly from his seat beside the podium. The treatment I experienced is unfortunately not unique, Jasmine continued. Many of our staff, particularly people of color, endure similar discrimination regularly. The difference is that I knew it was temporary, and I had recourse that most employees do not. She gestured toward Gabriella and the other flight attendants. These professionals provide exceptional service despite often challenging circumstances. They embody the values that built Sapphire Airways, yet they are frequently treated as if they are invisible or interchangeable. Jasmine's voice remained measured but carried unmistakable resolve. This ends today. As COO, my first initiative will be a comprehensive evaluation and restructuring of our corporate culture, beginning with clear consequences for discriminatory behavior, whether from staff, management, or passengers. Richard Thornton finally found his voice, standing abruptly. This is outrageous. Selectively edited footage presented without context or due process. The board will not stand for this kind of ambush. Marcus stepped forward smoothly. Mr. Thornton, I assure you this footage has not been edited in any way. It represents the complete security recordings from Flight SA-1125, which we maintain for safety and security purposes. All passengers are informed of this monitoring in our terms of service. Furthermore, William added, his voice carrying surprising strength, the board has already reviewed this footage in its entirety during our preliminary meeting. What we've shown here is merely a representative sample. This is still a witch hunt, Richard insisted, though with diminished conviction. Taking statements out of context and filming people without their knowledge. Filming that your son seemed quite comfortable doing himself, Michael Chen interjected, rising from his seat. Though his version was indeed selectively edited to create a false narrative. Whispers rippled through the crowd as Michael approached the podium. Jasmine nodded, yielding the microphone. For those who don't know me, I'm Michael Chen, founder of Horizon Technologies. I was a passenger on yesterday's flight, and I witnessed these events firsthand. He turned to address Richard directly. Mr. Thornton, I've spent my career building technology that connects people and breaks down barriers. When I received an invitation to discuss a potential partnership with Sapphire Airways, I was intrigued by the company's reputation for excellence. What I witnessed yesterday, however, was excellence from the staff and profound disappointment from those who claim to represent the company's interests. Michael gestured toward Jasmine. Ms. Wright handled an increasingly hostile situation with remarkable professionalism and grace. She prioritized passenger safety during severe turbulence, potentially preventing serious injury through her quick actions. And she did all this while enduring treatment that, frankly, no employee should ever have to tolerate. He addressed the broader audience. As a potential business partner and frequent first-class traveler, I can state unequivocally that luxury is not defined by treating service staff with contempt. True luxury is delivered through respect in both directions. As Michael returned to his seat, Brad Thornton finally looked up from his phone, scowling. This is ridiculous. We're paying customers. We can say whatever we want. A collective groan emerged from several attendees at his tone-deaf comment. Jasmine reclaimed the podium. Actually, Mr. Thornton, that's not correct. Our terms of service explicitly prohibit discriminatory behavior towards staff or fellow passengers. It's a condition of carriage that all customers agree to when purchasing a ticket. She addressed the room at large. To be clear, Sapphire Airways values all our customers, and we strive to provide an exceptional experience for everyone who flies with us. However, that commitment cannot come at the expense of basic dignity for our employees. William Wright stood with measured effort, joining his daughter at the podium. When I founded this airline, I made a promise that we would never sacrifice our principles for profit. That promise stands today. He turned toward Richard Thornton with a directness that silenced the room. Richard, your investment in Sapphire Airways has been significant, and we have valued your financial expertise. However, your behavior yesterday, and the attitudes it revealed, are fundamentally incompatible with the values of this company. Richard blanched visibly. William, be reasonable. This is one incident being blown out of proportion. This is not one incident, Jasmine interrupted firmly. This is merely the most thoroughly documented example of a pattern that has been developing for years. A pattern that has caused us to lose valuable employees, diminished our service quality, and begun to erode the very culture that differentiated Sapphire Airways in the marketplace. Marcus stepped forward, holding a document. The Executive Committee has prepared a formal resolution for board consideration, recommending the removal of Richard Thornton, Victoria Carmichael, and Alexander Reeves from the Board of Directors, citing violations of our ethics policy and actions detrimental to company interests. Victoria finally abandoned her studied indifference, her expression shifting to alarm. This is absurd. You can't simply remove board members without proper procedure. On the contrary, William replied calmly, the bylaws are quite clear. Article 7, Section 3 specifically addresses removal for cause, requiring a 2/3 vote of remaining board members. That vote has already been secured. Alexander Reeves stood abruptly. I've been on this board for 15 years. You can't possibly have the votes. The evidence was quite compelling, Marcus noted dryly. Perhaps more importantly, the direction you three have been advocating, prioritizing short-term returns over sustainable growth and ethical treatment of staff, has lost favor with the majority of our investors. As if on cue, several other board members nodded their agreement, confirming the shifting allegiances. This is corporate suicide, Richard declared, his face flushing with anger. My investment firm controls 12% of Sapphire's shares. If you force me out, I'll divest immediately and watch your stock price collapse. A new voice entered the conversation as an elegant older woman rose from her seat in the front row. Actually, Richard, that would be impossible for the next 24 months. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Elaine Foster, Sapphire Airways, Chief Financial Officer, approached the podium with a document of her own. For those who aren't familiar with the details of our shareholder agreement, Elaine explained, major investors are subject to a lockup provision preventing large-scale divestment without board approval for a period of 2 years, following any significant equity purchase. She glanced meaningfully at Richard. Your most recent acquisition of shares occurred just 4 months ago. Richard's expression shifted from anger to calculation. Fine. If I can't sell, then I'll simply use my voting power to block any initiatives this new leadership attempts to implement. William smiled slightly. You could try. However, the same agreement includes a provision that transfers voting rights to the board chair in cases where a shareholder has been removed from the board for ethical violations. The trap had been meticulously constructed, leaving Richard with no viable path forward. He looked from William to Jasmine, finally grasping the full extent of the strategy they had executed. You planned this, he accused, his voice hollow with realization. The undercover assignment, the documentation, it was all to force me out. No, Richard, Jasmine replied evenly. The undercover assignment was to genuinely understand our operations from the ground up. You forced yourself out through your own behavior and the culture you've been promoting within this company. Brad, finally grasping the severity of the situation, stood beside his father. This is a setup. Everyone talks the way we did in private. You're just playing politics. No, young man, William said firmly. We're upholding principles. There's a profound difference. He addressed the room at large. Sapphire Airways was founded on the belief that excellence and humanity are complementary, not contradictory, that treating people with dignity, whether they're serving you champagne or sitting beside you in first class, is the true definition of luxury. William gestured toward Jasmine. My daughter's experience these past 6 months has shown Us where we've strayed from that vision. Her leadership, along with Marcus Reynolds, will guide us back to our founding principles while navigating the challenges of our competitive industry. Jasmine stepped forward. To that end, I'm announcing several immediate initiatives. She gestured for Gabriella to join her at the podium. First, the creation of a new position, Director of Workplace Culture and Inclusion. Gabriela Rodriguez, who has demonstrated exceptional professionalism and courage during her 5 years with our airline, will lead this department with direct reporting access to senior leadership. Gabriela's expression of shock gradually transformed into one of determination as she took her place beside Jasmine. Second, a comprehensive review of our compensation structures, with particular attention to frontline staff whose dedication directly shapes the passenger experience. This announcement drew spontaneous applause from the employees present. Third, enhanced training for all customer-facing staff on managing difficult passenger interactions, backed by explicit company support for employees facing discriminatory behavior. Richard Thornton, recognizing defeat, began gathering his belongings. "This isn't over, William," he muttered, though the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Actually, Richard, it is," William replied quietly. "Security will escort you and your associates from the premises. Your personal effects from the boardroom will be delivered to your hotel." As security personnel appeared discreetly at Richard's side, William addressed him one final time. "For what it's worth, I genuinely regret that it came to this. Your financial acumen could have been an asset to Sapphire Airways if it had been balanced with respect for our people and our principles." Richard offered no response as he was escorted toward the exit, followed by a subdued Victoria and Alexander. Brad lingered momentarily, glaring at Jasmine with impotent anger before hurrying after his father. As the door closed behind them, William turned back to the gathered attendees. "Today marks not just our 25th anniversary, but a recommitment to the values that built Sapphire Airways. I invite all of you, employees, partners, and loyal customers, to join us in this renewed vision." He gestured toward Jasmine once more. "Under my daughter's leadership, alongside Marcus Reynolds and our dedicated executive team, Sapphire Airways will continue to deliver exceptional luxury service. But we will do so with the understanding that true luxury begins with how we treat each other." Applause filled the room, hesitant at first but growing in enthusiasm as the implications of the morning's events became clear. What had begun as a standard corporate anniversary celebration had transformed into a decisive moment of cultural reset. Jasmine surveyed the room, noting the mix of reactions, from the unrestrained joy of the flight crew to the more measured consideration of remaining board members recalculating their positions in this new reality. Her gaze met Michael Chen's, who offered a subtle nod of approval. Beside her, Gabriella still appeared to be processing her unexpected promotion, her expression cycling between disbelief and determination. William placed a supportive hand on Jasmine's shoulder, leaning close to whisper, "You've exceeded even my highest expectations. The real work begins now." Jasmine nodded, aware of the challenges ahead. Removing problematic leadership was only the first step. Transforming a corporate culture would require sustained effort and unwavering commitment. But as she looked at the gathered employees, particularly the cabin crew who had welcomed her as one of their own without knowing her identity, she felt confident in the path forward. The flight had encountered unexpected turbulence, but the landing had been successful, and now a new journey was beginning. 3 weeks after the dramatic events of Sapphire Airways' 25th anniversary celebration, Jasmine Wright stood before a vastly different boardroom. Gone were Richard Thornton, Victoria Carmichael, and Alexander Reeves, replaced by members who aligned more closely with the company's renewed commitment to its founding principles. "The quarterly numbers are encouraging," Jasmine noted, concluding her first formal presentation as COO. "Particularly telling is the 15% reduction in staff turnover since our new workplace initiatives were announced." Marcus Reynolds nodded approvingly from his seat beside William Wright. "The market has responded positively as well. Despite initial volatility following the board changes, our stock has stabilized and is trending upward." William, who had taken a less active, but still influential role as chairman, surveyed the room with satisfaction. "Numbers are important, certainly, but equally significant is the renewed sense of purpose I've observed throughout the company. The new boardroom atmosphere reflected the cultural shift underway, more collaborative, less hierarchical, with greater diversity of both people and perspectives. Among the most notable additions was Michael Chen, whose technology firm had finalized a partnership agreement to enhance Sapphire's digital customer experience. "If I may add something," Michael interjected. "As both a new board member and a frequent first-class passenger, I've noticed a tangible difference in service quality over the past few weeks. The staff isn't just going through motions. There's genuine engagement that elevates the entire experience." Elaine Foster, the CFO, consulted her tablet before speaking. "The data supports that observation. Customer satisfaction metrics have increased across all cabin classes, with the most significant improvements in first class, despite concerns that our new anti-discrimination policies might alienate premium passengers." "It turns out," Jasmine remarked, "that most luxury travelers appreciate being part of an experience built on mutual respect rather than artificial hierarchies. The small minority who expected to purchase the right to mistreat our staff, our customers, we can afford to lose." The board meeting concluded with approval of several initiatives Jasmine had proposed, including enhanced staff training, revised complaint procedures that protected employees from retaliatory actions, and a comprehensive review of compensation structures. As attendees gathered their materials, William asked Jasmine to remain behind. Once they were alone, he settled into a chair with the careful movements of a man managing ongoing health challenges. "I received an interesting call yesterday," he informed her. "From Richard Thornton's attorney." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Threatening litigation, I assume?" "Initially, yes," William acknowledged with a slight smile. "But ultimately offering settlement terms. It seems Richard has received an unwelcome education in consequences these past weeks." He slid a document across the table. "His investment firm has lost 2 major clients who cited ethical concerns after the video of his behavior. The complete, unedited version somehow reached certain influential circles." "How unfortunate for him," Jasmine remarked, reviewing the settlement offer with professional detachment. "Though I notice there's no admission of wrongdoing here." "Of course not," William chuckled. "Richard's ego couldn't survive that. But he's essentially agreeing to quietly transfer his shares to a neutral investment trust and remove himself from any involvement with Sapphire Airways. In exchange for our silence regarding the full details of his removal," Jasmine noted, reaching the final clause. William studied his daughter with pride. "What do you think?" Jasmine considered the document thoughtfully. "Legally, it's sound. Practically, it removes a potential disruptive force from our transition. But morally, you're wondering if it lets him off too easily," William completed her thought. "Yes. His behavior and the culture he promoted caused real harm to real people. A confidential financial settlement doesn't address that harm or prevent him from repeating the same patterns elsewhere." William nodded, pleased with her reasoning. "A valid concern. Though I would argue that losing board positions, clients, and public standing constitutes meaningful consequence." Jasmine wasn't entirely convinced. "Perhaps, but consequences without reflection rarely lead to genuine change." "What would you suggest instead?" William asked, genuinely curious about her approach. After a thoughtful pause, Jasmine outlined an alternative. "We accept the financial terms but modify the confidentiality clause. Rather than mutual silence, we require Richard to participate in the development of our new anti-discrimination training program, not publicly, but as a consultant who reviews materials and provides input based on his learning experience." William's eyebrows rose in surprise, then appreciation spread across his features. Rehabilitation rather than mere punishment, forcing him to engage with the very issues he dismissed. "Exactly. He doesn't have to make public admissions, but he does have to confront the reality of discrimination in corporate settings and contribute to solutions." William leaned back, visibly impressed. "He'll hate it." "Undoubtedly," Jasmine agreed. "But he'll do it to protect what remains of his reputation and client base, and in the process, he might actually learn something of value." Draft the counter-proposal, William decided. It's the kind of creative solution that addresses multiple needs simultaneously. Exactly the leadership thinking Sapphire needs. As Jasmine gathered her materials, William asked, "Have you spoken with Gabriella recently? How is she adjusting to her new role?" A smile spread across Jasmine's face. "Brilliantly. She's transformed from flight attendant to executive with remarkable adaptability. Her presentation to department heads yesterday was more impactful than anything an outside consultant could have delivered. Authentic, insightful, and grounded in real experience. Not unlike someone else I know," William observed with paternal pride. The difference being that Gabriella faced those challenges without the safety net of family connection or the knowledge that it was temporary, Jasmine noted. Her perspective is invaluable precisely because it's genuine in ways mine could never be. William nodded thoughtfully. Which is why your partnership is so effective. Different experiences informing a shared vision. Later that afternoon, Jasmine met with Gabriella in her new office, a space considerably more modest than Jasmine's executive suite, but nonetheless representing a dramatic change from serving drinks in aircraft galleys. "The flight attendant focus groups have been brutally honest," Gabriella reported, referencing her tablet. "Which is exactly what we needed. The recurring themes are consistent with what you experienced. Racial disparities in assignments, inconsistent enforcement of passenger behavior policies, and concerns about reporting incidents without facing retaliation. No surprises there," Jasmine acknowledged. "The question is how quickly we can implement meaningful changes. I've prioritized 3 immediate actions," Gabriella explained, displaying a presentation on her screen. "First, revising the passenger code of conduct to explicitly prohibit discriminatory behavior toward staff, with clear consequences for violations. Second, implementing an anonymous reporting system for employees to document problematic incidents. And third, revising scheduling protocols to eliminate bias in assigning premium routes and positions." Jasmine reviewed the proposals with approval. "These are excellent starting points. Have you encountered any resistance from management?" "Some middle managers are concerned about confronting valuable customers," Gabriella admitted. "But that perspective is shifting as we share data on the actual financial impact of high staff turnover versus the minimal revenue effect of enforcing behavioral standards." Their discussion was interrupted by a notification on Jasmine's phone, a message from Marcus with an attachment. She opened it to find a business news article with the headline, "Thornton Investment Group faces SEC investigation following whistleblower allegations." "Karma works in mysterious ways," Jasmine remarked, showing the screen to Gabriella. "Couldn't happen to a nicer guy," Gabriella observed dryly, "though I almost feel sorry for him. Almost." "The universe has its own way of balancing accounts," Jasmine noted. "Our focus needs to remain on building something better, not celebrating others' downfall." As their meeting concluded, Jasmine's phone rang with a call from the Public Relations Department. Diane Cooper, the former head flight attendant who had been uncertain whose side to take during the in-flight confrontation, was at reception requesting a meeting. "Send her up," Jasmine instructed, curious about this unexpected visit. 15 minutes later, Diane entered Jasmine's office with visible nervousness, her former authority as a supervisor now reversed in the new corporate hierarchy. "Ms. Wright, Jasmine, thank you for seeing me without an appointment," Diane began awkwardly. "What can I do for you, Diane?" Jasmine asked neutrally, neither cold nor overly welcoming. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the anniversary event," Diane explained, her discomfort evident. "About my role in perpetuating some of the problems you experienced firsthand. The biased assignments, the tendency to accommodate abusive, premium passengers at staff expense." She paused, gathering courage. "I want to acknowledge that I failed to provide the leadership our crew deserved. When faced with choosing between protecting staff and appeasing wealthy passengers, I consistently made the wrong choice." Jasmine studied her thoughtfully. "Recognition is an important first step. What brings you here today?" "Two things," Diane replied. "First, to offer my resignation, effective whenever you determine appropriate. And second, to volunteer my institutional knowledge during the transition. I've been with Sapphire for 17 years, and while my leadership approach was flawed, I do understand the operational complexities we face. The offer surprised Jasmine, who had anticipated either defensive justification or desperate pleading for job security. I appreciate your candor, Diane, but I'm not convinced resignation is the only option. Transformation requires both new perspectives and experienced voices willing to evolve. Jasmine considered for a moment before continuing. Instead of resignation, would you consider working directly with Gabriella's team? Your operational knowledge combined with her vision for cultural change could be valuable, provided you're genuinely committed to our new direction. Relief and determination mingled in Diane's expression. I am. Completely. Then we'll give it a trial period, Jasmine decided. 3 months of collaborative work with Gabriella, after which we'll all evaluate whether the arrangement is productive. As Diane left, visibly emotional about this unexpected second chance, Jasmine reflected on the ripple effects of transformation. People could surprise you, sometimes by revealing hidden prejudice, as Richard Thornton had, but also by demonstrating capacity for growth and change. 6 months later, Jasmine stood at the entrance to Sapphire Airways' newest first-class lounge at Los Angeles International Airport, preparing to officially open the redesigned space. Beside her, William observed with approval as his daughter confidently addressed the gathered media and dignitaries. At Sapphire Airways, we believe true luxury is defined not by exclusivity alone, but by the quality of human connection, Jasmine explained, gesturing toward the thoughtfully designed environment. This space represents our renewed commitment to exceptional service rooted in mutual respect. The redesigned lounge maintained its elegant aesthetic while incorporating subtle elements that honored the diverse workforce that made the Sapphire experience possible. Staff photographs and stories were artfully integrated into the decor, and the previously hierarchical service model had been replaced with a more collaborative approach that preserved luxury while eliminating artificial power dynamics. As attendees explored the space, William joined Jasmine near the panoramic windows overlooking the airfield. I was just remembering something my father told me when I was starting this company, William reflected. He said that how you treat people when you have power over them reveals far more about your character than how you treat your equals. Jasmine nodded. Wise words. Indeed, though even he might be surprised by how thoroughly you've proven them true. William gestured toward the busy terminal below, where a Sapphire Airways aircraft was preparing for departure. The true test of any business isn't just its balance sheet, but whether it makes the world slightly better through its existence. Across the lounge, Gabriella was conducting a media interview about Sapphire's new workplace initiatives, her natural charisma and authentic perspective making her an ideal spokesperson for the company's transformation. The feedback from our recent employee satisfaction survey shows significant improvement, Marcus reported, joining them with a tablet displaying colorful graphs. Particularly noteworthy is the reduction in reported incidents of passenger misconduct. Apparently, clear consequences are an effective deterrent. And our premium bookings? William inquired. Up 12% year over year, Marcus confirmed. Turns out that many travelers prefer knowing they're part of an experience built on dignity rather than disdain. As the event concluded, Jasmine received a text message from Michael Chen with a news link. Thornton Investment Group announces restructuring following regulatory settlement. The accompanying article detailed Richard Thornton's removal as CEO by his own board, citing reputational challenges and failure to uphold firm values. Rather than satisfaction, Jasmine felt a complex mixture of vindication and sobering awareness of how power could corrupt when wielded without accountability, a lesson she remained determined to remember in her own leadership journey. Later, aboard a Sapphire Airways flight to New York, Jasmine chose to travel anonymously in business class rather than the first-class section where her presence would be instantly recognized. The habit of observing operations firsthand had become integral to her leadership approach. The flight attendant serving her section, a new hire who hadn't been part of the company during Jasmine's undercover period, demonstrated the subtle but meaningful changes in service culture. There was confidence in her interactions with all passengers regardless of their status or demeanor, reflecting the institutional support that now backed every employee. When a passenger in the row ahead became unnecessarily demanding, Jasmine watched with approval as the flight attendant handled the situation with composed professionalism, firmly enforcing boundaries while maintaining service quality, exactly as the new protocols prescribed. As the aircraft soared eastward, Jasmine reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The humiliating experience of champagne dripping down her uniform while passengers laughed had transformed into a catalyst for meaningful change. What Richard Thornton had intended as an assertion of power had instead revealed its limitations when confronted with principled resistance. In her briefcase was a framed photograph that now hung prominently in her office. Not a formal corporate portrait, but a casual shot taken during her 6 months as a flight attendant. In it, she stood with Gabriella and other crew members, their genuine smiles capturing the camaraderie she'd experienced working alongside them. The image served as a daily reminder that leadership viewed from the top was inherently limited, while understanding gained from within revealed truths that no executive report could capture. It reminded her that dignity wasn't a privilege to be earned through wealth or status, but a fundamental right deserving of protection at every level of the organization. As the seatbelt sign illuminated for their descent into New York, Jasmine smiled at a final irony. Richard Thornton's condescending suggestion that she belonged in coach had been partially correct, though not in the way he'd intended. She belonged wherever understanding was needed, wherever perspectives needed to be broadened, wherever the gap between leadership vision and operational reality needed to be bridged. The aircraft touched down smoothly at JFK International Airport, the same airport where her undercover journey had begun 6 months earlier. Now, as the plane taxied toward the gate, Jasmine Wright looked out at the Sapphire Airways logo illuminated against the evening sky. Not just a symbol of luxury travel, but of a company being transformed from within by those willing to experience it from every perspective. True power lies not in wealth, status, or position, but in how we treat others, especially those we perceive as having less power than ourselves. Jasmine Wright discovered that discrimination thrives in environments where accountability is absent and where people believe their privilege shields them from consequences. By experiencing discrimination firsthand as an undercover flight attendant, she gained insights no executive report could provide. The story reminds us that dignity isn't something to be earned through wealth or status, but a fundamental right deserving protection. Richard Thornton and his associates believed their financial power entitled them to mistreat others, never imagining the tables would turn so dramatically. Transformation requires both accountability and opportunity for growth. Rather than simply punishing Richard, Jasmine created a path for rehabilitation that forced him to confront his own biases. This approach acknowledges that lasting change comes not just from consequences, but from understanding. Perhaps most importantly, the story demonstrates that leadership viewed only from the top is inherently limited. Jasmine's willingness to experience her company from the ground up revealed truths that would have remained invisible from the executive suite. Her journey reminds us that the true measure of character is how we treat people when we think no one of consequence is watching. What moments in your life have turned the tables on prejudice or discrimination? Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you because of your appearance or background? Comment below with your story. I read every comment and would love to hear your experiences with confronting bias. If this story of justice and transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that reveal important truths about human dignity and respect. Share this video with someone who might be facing discrimination, or anyone who needs a reminder that how we treat others matters more than any status or title. The ripple effects of standing up for respect can transform not just individual lives, but entire cultures. Thank you for watching, and remember, true class has nothing to do with your seat assignment in life, but everything to do with how you recognize the humanity in everyone you meet. Until next time, treat others with the dignity they deserve.